cars or something like that?
Yeah, if you want to give your contact information, I don't know if you have a card on you or if you can write that out. We'll get that to our staff.
There's a couple different routes. Typically, if somebody wants to file a variance, they go through the portal, which is online. And Jesse, you're right, a variance would be the method to add a third accessory structure, whereas two are only allowed. Adding a third one, I believe you would need a variance. I'll need to check into that just to verify that. But there's a portal that you would go through to fill out the variance. But if you want, I can have Terry, he's our code enforcement officer. He can give you a call tomorrow and try to navigate at least some of those first steps to walk you through the process. If that's the route that you want to go, there is a fee associated with a variance. You would have to then submit enough information, and then it would then get presented to this board, and then that board would make a decision based on the information that they received. And there's a checklist that they have to run through to make sure it meets the qualifications of a variance. So, but yep, totally a process that's done almost monthly, not necessarily a variance, but for any other type of application. So yeah, if you want, you don't have to give your number out loud right now. You can write it on a piece of paper.
We'd rather you didn't. We can write your information down and.
But hey, I mean, if you want some fan mail or something like that, you can give your name and address at this point. So, yeah, if you want to get that over to me before you leave, I'll make sure Terry connects with you.
Was there, within the letter that you got, was there anything that referenced you to the particular part of the code or not?
Yeah, it said, a third accessory building, basically, which I was not aware a greenhouse would be
Yep,
considered.
he's got it. Yep.
Yep.
All right. I just want to make sure you knew what part of the code it was, right?
Yes.
All right.
Thank you very much.
All right, thank you. All right, any other public comment that is not on tonight's agenda? All right, if you'd please come to the podium. And you don't have to give your address. No, we abolished that part of it.
Okay.
Cindy Duke, I live in Concord Crossing, part of Concord Road. I just had a question, maybe most people know what means, along the road there's orange flags. I'm not sure along the smoking field, I'm not sure if that's marked for utilities or pipe or what, or if that's development, something set up to be, development to follow further. Because we haven't seen the land, for sale for a while.
You're talking about this side of Concord Road?
The side that's where the field, the soybean field.
Okay.
So it's on that side, it's got orange flags. So I'm not sure how
Okay.
far down the road it goes, but I was just wondering what those were for.
Yeah, that's not within city limits, but I don't know if we have any information on that.
You're talking about Concord Road?
Yeah.
I think it's that asphalt, no, I'm just kidding.
No, don't go
Asphalt
down-
plant.
Don't go down that road.
Too soon.
No.
No, and our sympathies go out. So, no, there is nothing on the city's books. We don't have any information. Somebody else called about that. The only thing that I could think of, because we have not been contacted in any way, shape, or form, would be some type of utility company. First guess goes to a gas line, maybe being put down that road, but that's merely a guess. Johnstown doesn't have any water utilities or sewer utilities that aren't already existing on our particular side of the road, so it could also be a fiber optics cable, could be a
I was thinking maybe it's Spectrum.
multitude, could be Spectrum as well. And that typically represents some type of cable communication, those orange lines. So
All right.
if we get any information, we'll be more than welcome to pass it along as soon as we get it. Thanks, Cindy.
All right, thank you. Any other public comments that are not on the agenda? Did you have one from your dad? All right. Well, hearing none, we'll go ahead and move on with the plan here. We'll go on to approval of the minutes from June 13th, June 27th, and July 25th. And I'll make a motion to approve those in a block.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. All right, and we will move on to item number 6, the Johnstown Land Company presentation on the proposed PD district. So I will let Sean give you the background on this. Please keep in mind, this is not something that went in front of the zoning commission previously. So we are all here learning together.
Yeah, and I don't have a tremendous amount of background other than I'll introduce presenters tonight, and there's been discussions that's been had, obviously, with the 285 acre annexation that's been brought before the council is in direct relation to what we're seeing tonight as far as a PD application in order to rezone that area, and then the uses that would be consistent with whatever this plan presents. So, like I said, we have been in constant communication, but I think everybody's been working through a draft, and we'll be seeing, I think, the finalized plan with you all tonight, and it's probably still just a working document. This is not a formal submittal. This has not been given to us through the portal yet. I think this is a warm-up conversation from the dialogue that we've had with the Johnstown Land Company, that they want to introduce this all to you all, probably get some feedback. And I don't want to put words into their mouth, but I just want to reiterate, it has not been formally submitted to the portal. So whenever that happens, it'll get a little bit different of a process, and that the timelines will start being kept track of. So, and I'll introduce, this is Jamie McNally and Aaron Underhill.
Okay. Can everyone hear me on the mic? Okay. If I get away from it, let me know. You can yell at me. You yell at all the time. Good evening. My name is Aaron Underhill, and I'm an attorney with Underhill and Hodge, and I'm here on behalf of the Johnstown Land Company, which is an affiliate of the New Albany Company. And the purpose and intent of our coming before you tonight is to give you an informal introduction of what our current thoughts are on our plan, and we intend to very shortly hereafter file a zoning application, as Sean mentioned, that would be more formal, but we are not expecting any action tonight, nor could you take any if I wanted you to, because we haven't filed the application. So we've got a presentation here. I wanted to first say a few words about this property. The old adage in real estate is that the most important factors are three things: location, location, location. The property we are here to talk about tonight is in a position which, if developed properly, will ensure that the city of Johnstown prospers for many decades to come. It is located on the doorstep of the biggest economic development project that the state of Ohio has ever seen. Johnstown may not have chosen Intel, but it does have a choice to seize the opportunity it presents. Intel's commitment to build its campus was an important step for our country by moving us away from our independence, away from our dependence on foreign countries to manufacture microchips. It has positive ramifications on national security and supply chain. It brings jobs and opportunity to Central Ohio, not just itself, but by attracting many other companies that will come along with it. Obviously, the project was a huge victory for the state of Ohio, for Licking County, and the city of New Albany. But even better, its positive impacts will reverberate to many other communities. Being right next door to Intel puts Johnstown in the driver's seat to most immediately and certainly reap its benefits. The best way to influence development is to control it yourself. That's why we're annexing 285 acres into the city of Johnstown, and we view this as a public-private partnership. We have also included in this upcoming application additional acreage for a total of 417 acres, stretching from Green Chapel up to Duncan Plains Road between Clover Valley and Mink, and we'll show you some maps here shortly. But make no mistake, development is going to happen in this area. There's no doubt about it. Being in this location, it is primed and ready, and the question is, how does it get done and what does it include? We're committing to moving the next wave of opportunity to within Johnstown's borders so that you can reap the economic benefits that others are being able to reap themselves. The adoption of your planned district code here in the recent months was, in my opinion, a very important first step to putting that tool in the toolbox to allow you to comprehensively review applications. So rather than coming before you with a series of independent applications over time, which would be a take it or leave it sort of situation with a straight zoning, you take the regulations in the code, or you, like this gentleman has to do a variance. But what better to do than to comprehensively plan something, put entitlements in place that will answer a lot of questions and set the rules for a large area of land that is going to be very important to your community. We have watched intently as you've gone through the process of revising the code. We have talked on a number of occasions with MKSK, your planner. We've paid very close attention to the framework that's been put in place as a starting point to update your community plan in more detail. And we've really listened to that, and we hope tonight will show a furtherance of the goals in that plan. We have also had another guiding principle in mind, which is to make sure that we're developing in a way that benefits the school district and enhances what is really a large and great community asset that everybody is proud of. So, you know, we think by benefiting the school district, it makes for a stronger community, which is good for everybody. And our track record in New Albany, I think, would back us up on that point. Also, this is a chance for Johnstown to really create opportunities for income tax revenue streams and other streams of revenue, to beef up its infrastructure, to enhance its services, and hopefully provide a lot of opportunity for things like new parks. So with that, sort of teeing it up, and I'd like to go through this presentation in some more detail. So our working name for this is the Johnstown Gateway Plan District. We have, as I mentioned, we're very cognizant of the deep roots that are in Johnstown, a lot of pride in the community. You know, we, for instance, think your historic core, your downtown is a very big asset as well, in addition to the school district, and it's something that we want this development to complement and not take away from. Like, there are many ways we can do that, and we'll probably get into that a little later. I mentioned the school district. We have had very early discussions with the administration on some of our thoughts. We are a long way from having anything agreed upon with them. They're in a listening phase themselves, and we intend over the coming weeks and months to sit down with them and have working sessions so that we can make sure that this project delivers for them as well. This is the framework plan that MKSK provided, and that has been sort of generally blessed by, I believe, the Planning Commission and Council. That area in the purple is really what we're talking about here. Not all of that area, but in what we call the triangle area right to the north of Intel is what we're looking at rezoning here. This area under the plan speaks to job creation and a mix of uses to support that job creation, and that's what our plan intends to do. I'll have to read this to you.
Are these slides going to be made available to the zoning commission after the presentation?
They can be.
Okay.
So the framework plan that was put together has a number of goals. Obviously, the fiscal position of the city and the school districts are top of mind. Creating job opportunities within the city to allow the financial benefit of those is important. And controlling your own destiny and defining your own borders is obviously an important thing as well. And here again, one of the reasons why we're looking to annex. So the plan district basically provided guidelines and sort of a construct under which these development plans can be reviewed. And so the first stage is a zoning/preliminary development plan. That is what we will be filing for. There will then be, as I'll talk you through later, a secondary review process for different development projects that's in accordance with that code, what allows for there to be confirmation that proposed projects are meeting the rules and the standards and the requirements of the zoning text that would ultimately, we hope, be approved. But if you can imagine a place like I'm not trying to throw any other community under the bus, but in Columbus, Sawmill Road on the Columbus side there, and how that's developed over time in really a manner that's not comprehensive, causing traffic issues and sort of no real cohesiveness in terms of design elements. That's the sort of thing that a plan district can avoid. It can allow you to get commitments from a single developer, single landowner, and a single applicant that avoids that sort of situation and ensures that there are great streetscapes. There are traffic commitments that will ensure that the impact of the traffic is mitigated and other things. This This Green Chapel Gap area, which I believe is a term that MKSK came up with, is extremely important. It has a lot of different influences regionally, from the state, obviously, from the county, from New Albany. You know, there are, we all know, other utility service providers lurking in the background, and, you know, utilities are the key to development. So being able to obtain those infrastructure, fulfill our infrastructure needs through Johnstown is going to be a long and complicated undertaking, but we are committed to identifying and creating funding mechanisms to assist the city in doing that and allowing them to make an investment using, you know, new streams of revenue that can then be used to facilitate economic development. So not only have you all been working on a planning effort, but this Licking County framework with a number of different jurisdictions involved has released, and I think they will be releasing in relatively short order some additional details, but they have some final guiding principles that they have adopted. And you know, the coordination of efforts between jurisdictions is important. We believe that, I'm not going to read through all of these, but the ones we've highlighted, we're trying to, are two of the ones that jump out at us as being very important and that we're trying to address with this proposal. So we want to adhere to the vision that's being created through your long-range planning process, grow and balance your financial base, you know, ensuring that there are different types of industry here and office uses, data centers, those sorts of things. And then use this, some of these early developments to enhance the ability to provide additional services and amenities for the community, which in turn also will attract commercial job growth. So how do we intend to do it? We need to develop a strategy to fund the growth. We need to create thoughtful entitlements to provide flexibility to meet market demand, but also provide predictability for the community as to what to expect and to end users. Some of these larger projects that you see, you know, throughout Licking County on the western side are, you know, one of the things that was in place, the tools in the toolbox were speed to market, tools that facilitated speed to market, created what we call shovel-ready sites with zoning in place, with opportunity for incentives, abatements, and other things through agreements with the school district. Interestingly, and as I was thinking through this presentation tonight, investigated, a lot of people don't realize this, but there are already 4,500 acres of non-residential and commercial job generating and real estate tax generating development or development planned in the Johnstown School District, but in the city of New Albany. A lot of people don't realize that. So the school district itself has, through a revenue sharing arrangement with the city of New Albany, even during abatement periods, is getting some income tax payments from the city. They're sharing in that revenue. Without speaking for the city council, it's their decision, but we would envision a similar situation here. And I think, you know, we haven't even really seen the tip of the iceberg on what that can do for the school district, given that Intel is not up and operating yet, and we have other projects that have been announced, such as Amazon and Microsoft data centers. So those sorts of uses, especially those data centers, are important from the standpoint of real estate property tax generation. Obviously, they're very expensive to build, and therefore ultimately create a very sizable bit of revenue for the district, who school districts typically, you know, have the lion's share of the tax bill, as we all know. Long-term partnerships with local and regional governments and agencies to invest in infrastructure. This is a little bit difficult to see, it's not very large, but these are projects that have been identified either as actually going to happen or in the planning stages. There's a lot to take in here, but you know, more than a dozen of them. Some state-funded projects, some county efforts through their TID, and then the market is, you know, ready to make investments on the private side as well, which is evidenced by the fact we're right in front of you tonight. The roadway and the infrastructure issues are important to resolve. This is a map that was prepared by ODOT demonstrating where it's predicted car trips associated with coming and going from work will come from for Intel right now. And we are going to be showing you that we will have a residential component to this project. And one of the reasons is we think that will assist by being able to live near where you work. It will assist with some of the congestion on the roadways. And hopefully we'll keep, we know there's a big issue with the center of town here in Johnstown and that intersection. And by allowing some employees to live near where they work, they won't even have to come in through the middle of town in the morning. So that's going to be an important factor. Roads are one thing, utilities are another. Obviously, you all as a city are putting a great deal of effort into your utility capacities. And when I say utilities, I mean sanitary sewer and water capacities. Obviously, a lot of infrastructure to be needed to serve a project of this magnitude, and we're committed to rolling up our sleeves here again and finding a way to partner with the city to get those things done. A hallmark of what we've done in other communities is parks and open space and having a system that is connected, that is meaningful, and that is an organizing element for different modes of development. So we expect there to be more than adequate green space. It will be a guiding principle of ours to make sure that we're creating these really nice places for not only those who live and work here in this particular development, but in the community at large. And your PD district code also has a requirement for dedication of parkland, and we intend to meet or exceed those requirements. Okay, how do you pay for this infrastructure, et cetera? So one of the things that the New Albany Company and the City of New Albany has been very successful with is implementing what's called a new community authority charge. And it's a way to have new development help pay for itself. The new community authority charge is voluntary in that a property owner has to agree to subject themselves to that authority. And that authority is a millage rate charge that is paid annually by the property owner based on the value of their property. So it's essentially an additional tax that is voluntary. And even in a situation where a project has a tax abatement, we've been successful in still having that charge apply to the property, and end users seem to be willing and able to digest that. But 9.75 mils has typically been what we have. We've imposed that in the New Albany portions of the business park to date. And a lot of the infrastructure development that you're seeing is funded from that assessment charge. And you think of a data center that's worth tens of millions of dollars, and you do the math there, you get several of those, for instance, and you've got a lot of revenue to apply directly to infrastructure costs or to leverage for bond issuances or loans to get those sorts of things done. And nothing's certain but death and taxes, and this goes on your tax bill like everything else. So bond issuers are willing to lend money based on that stream of revenue. And so we are going to make that commitment as we come through the zoning process and deal with other related items to impose the new community authority charge on ourselves. Important to note, it is voluntary, and no one in the community will be required that lives here will be required to join it, nor will they be asked, at least from our perspective. So it is something that is truly going to be related to our development and will be on our backs.
Could another property owner join the?
They could. They
Okay.
could. And
Would it have to be, you'd have to agree to that?
they'd have to agree to it. And there are ways for cities to require newly annexed ground, for instance, to do it. But it would be very rare for existing development to be subjected to one. So as your community would continue to grow, if you decide to annex more property, my advice would be to make sure that everyone has to contribute and pay their fair share.
So you wouldn't have to create like multiple new community authorities, but basically all the new major sections would fall under one community authority typically? Okay.
That's right, and if you set it up properly, you can apply it to property that is under your ownership right now. And then as others come in, you can have an expansion area, and it requires further action by the city on a case-by-case basis, but the expectation will be there for everybody, and it'll be out there for everyone to be on notice about.
That is the preferred method, to have one community authority. There's other municipalities that have had multiple, and it's been a challenge to kind of wrangle them. City of Columbus has numerous community authorities, and I think it's hard for them to kind of manage all those. So Johnstown is specifically strategically looking at one community authority.
Are the revenues from the, generated by the community authority, is that controlled by the community authority, or does that go to the city?
It is, but
Okay.
if you set them up the right way, you can sort of restrict the purposes of the community authority, and you can basically,
You allocate some of the funds like New Albany School did for the school and stuff?
correct.
Okay.
And interestingly, this is an important point, the majority of the board members are appointed by the city, so theoretically, you have control of the NCA board, which also gives you a level of comfort, I would think.
Have you guys planned on what the initial, or I guess, goals of the authority money will go to? You guys have that planned out yet in that
Well,
detail?
I think it's not only a question for us, but it's a question for the
Just
city and
everybody's thinking,
council in
okay.
terms of where those monies would go. We're not necessarily looking for these to be funds that are internal and helping us,
Yeah. I was just
decide.
wondering if you guys had a plan, or it's something you're gonna work with the city on going forward, okay?
Absolutely.
Do you have any numbers on what that anticipated revenue would be?
Well, we are working on that
Okay.
as we speak, and I think it will depend on, development types, what we're able to get approved through zoning, et cetera, but it will be a sizable amount of money ultimately. Okay, back to these thoughtful entitlements. You are going to have, maybe it's a fortunate or unfortunate duty to read a zoning text that's about 80 pages in length when I file it, and you can imagine how fun that was to write. But the reason for that is we want to be very clear in the commitments we're making and the expectations that everybody's going to have with the project. And additionally, the Johnstown code is a bit outdated, probably doesn't even mention the words data centers, for instance. And so we really didn't have a whole lot we could refer back to in the code to say, we're gonna do it this way. So we've had to write in a lot of our own standards. So I expect, when we get this filed and we come back to you, we're gonna be doing a lot of page flipping, and, we all might wanna bring some coffee. But carefully thought out entitlements allow for, the creation of things like shared use trails, new parks and rec facilities, restaurants and community spaces, and there are many things that we can accomplish by comprehensively going about this rather than on a piecemeal basis. I think I've kind of gone over this, but we view this as a generational opportunity for the city, and I was thinking about, I have 3 boys of my own. 2 of them are graduated from high school and they're just moved out to Colorado. Now, that's not to say they didn't have an opportunity to stay here, but, I think there is probably room in Johnstown for creating opportunities like multifamily and new job generating uses to give the kids in your community, when they grow up, the opportunity to remain in Johnstown and make a good living for themselves and have a nice place to live. And it's not that it's not there today, but this will really expand those opportunities for the school children. So it's a little difficult as we get into our plan here to understand the magnitude of what Intel is. I think we all have seen maybe a rendering like this, but this is a perspective looking southward from Green Chapel Road at the new roundabout that's going in. And so, we've got this major facility, nationally and internationally known, and so what do you do across the street from something like that? And so there are many things we want to accomplish. We want to, one, try to accommodate the users and suppliers that come along with this sort of use, and there are many of them. There are others that just want to be in the area because we're on the map now, right? Central Ohio's on the map with this. And so first and foremost, we want to create and set aside a lot of ground for the purpose of those sorts of uses that I've gone through previously, but the major employment generating uses. Here's another view of Intel, pretty sizable building, and this is one of many that ultimately we hope will be constructed here. As you start looking at a plan, one of the first things you do is you look at the topography and what are the environmental features on the site. And so this is intended to just give you a general overview. You'll note when we start going through more particulars here, this large flat area lends itself best to some of those bigger developments with large buildings and bigger parking fields just because of the topography. As you go eastward, you get a little more topography, and that lends itself to more of a mixed use sort of situation where you can have residences and restaurants and retail in close proximity to one another and create some really good vistas through the use of some of these environmental features that are on the site, such as the streams. So this slide demonstrates kind of our first pass at showing where some of these uses could be located. Data center and industrial in this big portion here. And then the other portion is sort of a mixed use, very high level concept. I want to be clear, we have no plans on the shelf for any of this. The intent of the zoning and getting to you at an early stage is to get your input so that we can set the rules to make sure that when we do have developments that we're drawing up, that they're consistent with the rules we've set forth. And this could develop in any number of different ways within those rules. So here we are setting aside 5 different sub areas. We're going to go through each one of them, but Green Chapel is on your south, Clover Valley borders is on the west, Mink Street on the east, and then Duncan Plains kind of runs between sub area 1 and sub area 2. I'll get into why we've sort of separated those momentarily, but these are the properties we're talking about with this application that will be forthcoming. Sub area 1, here again, these buildings are not buildings that we're proposing. They are character images to demonstrate the level of quality and size and scale that we anticipate in this area. All of the uses I've been mentioning over and over again here will be the only uses permitted within this sub area, nothing else. Sub area 2 is more of the same, but there's a distinction. Sub area 2B is actually owned by the Port Authority right now, and they're in contract to sell to a third party by the name of Huntington Industries. And Huntington, it's a warehousing and distribution facility they're proposing. I'll show you a plan momentarily. This is actually what this will likely look like on this particular one. They had no other means for getting a zoning done to facilitate the project because warehousing and distribution isn't listed in your code. So we've been working with them cooperatively to include them so that we can, hopefully get them a project out of the ground and really start some economic development opportunities right away. Here's the plan that they are proposing. Obviously at a very high level, but this is how it would lay out. We can talk more particulars about it. We actually have a representative of theirs here tonight too as well if there are specific questions for them. Okay, undoubtedly talk of housing in this is going to be top of mind for everybody in this proposal. Alexis Fitzsimmons, the executive director of Grow-Licking County, has said housing is an economic development issue. And what that means is that companies nowadays are, one of the first things they're asking when they are doing site selection is, where are my employees going to live? Where are they going to eat lunch? What can they do right after work? Is there anywhere to go? And so the real secret sauce these days for communities that want to attract major employment generators is to provide housing and mixed use in close proximity so that those opportunities are right next to those facilities, and that especially the younger generation, that's sort of what they're going for and what they expect these days. And so it really does help to attract new development on the economic side by providing these other uses. So sub area 3 is where we're proposing multifamily development. And we are also in this area going to allow for some mixed use in the southern portion of it likely, should the opportunity arise. But this will be the only area where only multifamily would be permitted as a standalone use. And I know that there will be concern for how this will affect the school district. I want to mention that we're intending, one thing was interesting in your code that I saw, I don't even know if I ended up bringing it in, but your minimum requirements for square footages in apartments in your code is very high. It's something like 1,200 square feet for a one-bedroom apartment. And one of the things we're going to do in our zoning text is bring those numbers way down for minimums so we can build smaller units, and those will not be as attractive to students. We are also going to make a commitment that 95% of those units would, in this district, would be 1 or 2 bedroom units. So the overwhelming majority of these will not be really large enough to house a large number of students. We realize we need to convince the school district that those commitments are going to yield the result we want. And we intend to roll up our sleeves here again and begin in earnest talking to the schools about how we believe this is going to be a financial windfall for them without the need to, without this driving the need for a new school in and of itself. We do not believe that at all. We don't think there'll be many kids here. So mixed use, this is a part we're really excited about, and if you think of mixed use and you think of areas where you can grab a cup of coffee in the morning, go to work, at lunchtime, be able to walk across the street, get a sandwich. And in other respects, there's opportunities for things like a grocery store or something like that. We don't intend for this to be some sort of a big box environment over here. We do want the opportunity to do something like that in this area, and the devil will be in the details to get everybody comfortable with that. But we don't intend for this to be some major shopping center with 3 or 4 big box users. We want to make sure that we're keeping this feeling as if it's walkable and like its own little neighborhood. So this is an example here again, a character image of what we envision. Different building types, different uses in very close proximity to one another, organized by open space that all can enjoy. And we're proposing this just across the street from Intel, and that's very intentional. Given that, we've got that roundabout in front of us and we'll have a stream of employees coming in and out of there every day. This will make it very convenient for them to go live, work, and play right across the street. And the last sub-area is sub-area 5. This is a smaller sub-area. It's got frontage to the west of the last sub-area we were speaking of on Green Chapel. It is just to the south of sub-area 1, which is allows for all of those major employment uses. We are not quite certain at the moment which direction the market will have us head with this piece of property. So when we file our zoning, we want to leave open the opportunity to either choose to go down the path of sub-area 1 uses or sub-area 4 mixed uses. And we'd like the opportunity to let that market evolve over time. And then once we would make that decision in the future with our first development, we would be stuck continuing down that path. So in other words, we could not have a distribution center here or a warehouse and then also have apartments next to it. We'd be sort of picking our path later on. And so, we believe this is really dependent on how the market reacts to the first part of our development. Okay, so your PD district process is interesting, and I think it really speaks toward being economic development friendly. There's this new process that's been introduced in that code, which is called a certificate of development approval application. There will be there's a new board, the name's escaping me, Sean, I don't remember.
CODA is the alphabet soup of it, but
Code of Bus.
Yeah, right.
D,
So I forget,
D,
it's
not
the
T.
Architectural Review Committee or
Right.
something to that effect, but
it's in here somewhere.
when these are significant projects that really can make a big impact on your community financially, come in the door, they need to have certainty of process, they need to have it streamlined. And so this is going to be a group of appointees by the city. I can't remember exactly who all is on the committee per the code, but I think, Sean, maybe your role as city manager, you would be on it.
Yeah, council went through this, and I think you all had a chance to weigh in on that specific board and trying to balance that with the appropriate city staff, as well as the correct representation from city council, as well as maybe some representation from the zoning board as well, to try to utilize a mixed bag of representation.
Did we end up with one zoning, or did it end up being 3 council members?
I think one of them has to be the council member
So I
from
think it's
zoning.
just 3 council members that are on that.
But whichever council member represents zoning, I think is on there.
There's a qualifier. It has to be a certain level of economic development in order to kind of sidestep some of the other process. But the speed to market is seeming to be a trend. Is it ever important for any type of large economic development that
So
could
we set the
exist?
threshold for 350 to go through the speed process, right?
350 is for the PD district to be applicable.
I think it's 50,000 square feet is the minimum for, I think that's where you ended up.
I believe, I would have to check before I
Size
want to go on the
building,
record.
It has to be one of those uses that are identified in like a sub-area 1. So it has to be something that really has a potential to bring a big benefit to the city financially.
So an individual building within the PD, this is a little bit new to us because we just came up with this code. An individual building within the PD district would have to go through its own process?
It would go its own process, and I call these processes secondary review. So they're essentially ensuring that there's some board or group, such as the planning commission, which I'll get to in a moment, will, basically make sure that the development that's proposed conforms with the underlying rules of the zoning. And so this process is intended to have different sorts of appointees on it, people that are dealing with the day in and day out of utilities and funding mechanisms and things to make sure that the answers are more easily addressed in that sort of a meeting. And so, here again, this is really about speed to market. Now, everything else, if it doesn't fall into that category, will go through a final development plan application review, which is at a meeting like this or at city council. I think there are different rules for what type of development may go where. I think it starts at city council
For which piece?
for a final development plan on a non-major economic development project.
Got to jog my memory. It goes
It
all the
comes
way back
back
to
to-
June, right?
It comes back to us, I think.
It depends.
Yeah.
So you're here.
Goes to council.
Council has the ability to kick it back to the zoning board, but they can also decide to actually accept it and review it internally. So that there's a little bit of flexibility with council. They ultimately get to make the deciding factor. Is that accurate, Thad?
Yeah, council can decide who the reviewing body is for that final development plan.
So the thought is on things
That
like
changed.
multifamily residential, retail and restaurant type uses, that those will go through a review that is more typical timing wise, because those sorts of uses have no expectation of a streamlined process, and frankly, they're not as in a competitive a situation as a major employer use would be, which you may have a number of communities competing for a single project, and so it really, you put yourself at a competitive advantage by having that separate process for them. Okay, we are going to also propose, and this is something that I've been involved with in other places. Last count, I've been in 40 different communities with zonings over the years. It means I'm getting old. But we're gonna have this process where we're able to transfer units between sub-areas 3 and 4, and ultimately if sub-area 5 were to develop in the same manner as 4, we would have the ability through the final development plan process to ask you to move units to other places. And so, we're gonna have a number of units that could be developed, but those will be able to be moved around with the consent of the reviewing body for the final development plan. And the reason for that is, on a project of this size, it's very difficult to predict exactly what's gonna happen over what's gonna be a pretty long time horizon of,
What is the timeline you're thinking?
I think we'll see some development occur on the the non-residential side next year if we can get this approved. I think that, you know, the rest will be market-driven, but I think overall, this is probably at least a 10-year project to build out. So it's important for everyone to understand this is not gonna happen all at once. In fact, with the multifamily, it would be unusual to build any more than a certain number of units at once, because you don't want them to be, you want one to be filled up and successful before you start another, so you're not sort of competing with one another. And so you're not gonna see, you know, 3 different multifamily neighborhoods sprouted out of the ground at once. So we think that's probably about an 8 to 10 year sort of situation to build out multifamily units.
So you put your preliminary plan out there, you can't start building until the final plan's approved.
Correct.
So all those swaps would be decided on before the final, before any dirt's moved?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely.
Gotcha.
Yes.
Thanks.
This is an example of how this could work. You know, assume in these 2 sub-areas on the left, you have the right to develop a certain number of units as a baseline. You can, through this final development plan process, take units out of either of those sub-areas, place them into the bank momentarily, and then move them to the other sub-area. And, you know, so that's a discussion to be had on a case-by-case basis about whether it's appropriate. Okay. So here again, Intel, right at our doorstep. This is a very high-level sort of massing study to demonstrate the mixed-use area looking back south at that building. I don't want anybody to read too much into the architecture or anything like that, but this is a demonstration of one way this could work. You can see, if you look closely enough, some multifamily units, probably some residential above retail uses. We envision things like assisted living facilities maybe being here, or independent living units, medical uses, that sort of thing. Anything you can imagine that you would find in maybe more of a historical area where that's walkable. Here's another vision. Which direction does this look?
East. Oh, no, sorry, west. That's looking west, and that's Intel and,
Yeah, okay.
In the back.
Intel's in the background there. Just another idea. And here again, no particular plans at this time. We're in the very early stages. And some other images. This demonstrates sort of the our point of view in terms of how you organize around open space. And you can see this is a meaningful piece of parkland or open space. I use those terms interchangeably. Parkland in my mind is something that's owned by the city. Open space is something that's privately owned and maintained. And those sorts of decisions as to ownership and maintenance will be made as we go through that secondary review process. But, you know, something like this would be a very, very attractive to a number of different uses. This is an example of an assisted living facility and how it could look. You know, here again, one idea on a piece of paper. So I wanted to talk about what we need to do to get from here to there. And first thing I want to emphasize is we want to be collaborative all along the way with the city, with the school district, with the regional players. And, you know, we're going to touch all the bases in that regard. We want your input. We know this is different from anything you've ever seen before. We want to hear if there are things that you don't like about it, if there are things you really like about it. You know, but we do want to emphasize that in our opinion, the big employment generating uses, which are really what we're all trying to get to, are not going to be possible without some of these other things happening. It's just the way that the world is, and to be competitive, you've got to have those things in close proximity to the workplace. And so right now, we're planning on filing the zoning documents this week. And that's more to kind of get the clock running. We expect to be back here next month in front of you with a formal application to review. The annexation has been approved by the county. The county commissioners, essentially under Ohio law, under this type of annexation, are a rubber stamp. And so they've approved it. The city has the ultimate say as to whether they want to accept that property into the community. And we're in what's called a 60-day waiting period under Ohio law before the city could even act. So I think first time city council could even act to accept the annexation is in maybe early October. So at the very least, we're gonna be at this that long. But our goal would be to finalize the annexation and the zoning at the same time so that everybody knows exactly what they're getting. And also, we anticipate there to be a series of agreements for city council to consider, both with the school district and possibly with us as the developer, to kind of outline how infrastructure is going to be built and paid for to serve the site.
So you can apply your zoning application before you're annexed?
Yes, yes. And city council cannot take action until the annexation has been approved. That can be on the same meeting as long as the annexation comes first.
Right, and to the point for this commission is because it is a recommendation from this
We don't
commission
make the
as to
decision.
rezoning, that can be done before the annexation is finalized.
So we can make a recommendation on something that's not in our jurisdiction? That sounds
make
still
a-
unusual, but.
Of course you can.
Tell me
We do every time. Of course you can.
You
just-
absolutely can make a
Okay, yeah, all right.
recommendation on something before it is
Okay.
finalized as an annexation.
That's the strategic plan. That's
That's
what
interesting,
we've,
I didn't know that.
Yeah.
we've already done that, essentially.
I guess, is this the last slide? Yeah. Okay. You know, we want to continue to be open that we don't believe that this development will be successful and if it harms the school district. We want to do this in a manner that enhances the school district financially and otherwise. We believe that if you don't have a strong school system, the rest of it doesn't matter. And so we ended with this slide as an acknowledgement that we see that, and we're committed to working with Dr. Wagner and his board moving forward. And obviously, that won't be anything that this group has to do with, but I know city council will be involved with that as well, and Sean. So.
Boy, that's a great picture.
Is it?
Yeah.
I believe that gentleman may have taken it.
Oh, yeah. Do I get paid for that? That's copyright. All right.
Needs
Two
an
attorneys in the
NIL.
room.
Needs that
Sounds
NIL
like
deal.
some money's ready.
So I appreciate your time, and Jamie and I, is Tom here? We were supposed to have someone else here, but he hasn't made it. We're happy to answer your questions, and, you know, can stay here as long as you want. But wanted to give you kind of a preview of what was coming, and it's going to be a fun several months coming up.
All right. Well, we appreciate the information. I want to start off with our zoning commission here with questions that they have, and then I will go to the public. I would ask probably first to put you on the spot, anybody from the school board, probably first, because that's what we've, identified as most important here, and then we'll proceed through. All right. I will open with our commission's questions.
So I have a question with the timeline and the process. Basically, my understanding of our code gives us very little leverage on input after the preliminary approval. So it seems like this plan has a lot of moving pieces after that approval. That just worries me that if you're not going to be getting annexed until October, but you say there might be building next year, so that's like an 8-9 month period where it seems to be a lot of swaps and stuff just for a 6-month period, and how much is going to change in that 6-month period. I don't have as much experience as you do in this kind of stuff, so I won't presume to one way or the other, but it seems to me like, I know from my perspective, we don't, like, after the preliminary approval, basically, we just have to determine whether you followed the plan or not. So all those moving pieces in the plan puts the city at a disadvantage, I think.
Sure. So I would say, for instance, in terms of the timing, the Intel project, I believe from the time we got wind of it, we being the city and the New Albany company to the time it was announced, approximately 9 months. If you think about the biggest economic development project in the state's history coming together that quickly, there's time. that's obviously not a lot of time to do that, and so, but we're seeing more and more with the proper tools in place, those sorts of things can happen at that speed, and that's a result of having, we're gonna have a number of standards in our text relating to architecture for these larger buildings, for instance, that are going to drive design and make sure that you don't get a building that's just a complete, wall of unfinished, cement blocks, for instance. We are also going to be providing character images to set expectations, just like some of the things we showed tonight. And we're hoping to define things so that it makes it very easy to bring something through that meets the intent and spirit of what we're getting approved here. Is there some leap of faith? Yes.
Yeah, maybe you could just give me some background on why you think the swaps are useful to you in the plan as part of the process.
So into sub-area 5?
Yeah,
Yeah.
for the different, like we could, and the area where you're gonna make a determination later, a little bit of background
Right.
from there might help.
So, it really is dependent upon a couple of things. One is the size of a project. If we were to get what we would call a significant mega user that really needs a lot of land, they may want a front
Okay.
door
All right.
off of sub-area 5.
That's fair enough.
Right,
Okay.
something like that.
I think, I can help answer that question too. So I just want to clarify kind of what our role is in the development process. We're typically land developers that we typically do not build buildings. We usually focus on zoning, entitlements, utilities, and the tax base. And then we sell the land to other developers that will then go vertical. And at that time, they usually get involved in the final development plan when you start talking about materiality and like the fine details of the project too. So with this plan, Aaron's mentioned speed to market. For example, sub-area 5, that would be a great site to get Johnstown's hat in the ring with One Columbus to start attracting like a really great employer that might be a biopharmaceutical company or, whoever it is. But I think we can't really predict them.
All right, that makes sense of
Yeah.
why the flexibility.
that's
All
a
right,
good
good. Okay, I got you now.
Yeah.
Let's see what else I got. If you guys want to come in.
The other thing I might mention, I'm sorry to interrupt, there's no way for us to avoid like a plating process, so in terms of the street network, public streets and everything, per your code, that has to come through this group and then ultimately the city council. So some of those decisions, you'll still, those are gonna have to be dealt with as they come, and you'll have a typical review process for those sorts of things.
You mentioned public-private partnership, and then you want to collaborate with us within the city. So what does that look like? Does that mean like meetings with, you just like these proposals, these buildings?
So,
For the public.
we have engaged a little bit with Sean in the last several months. God bless the man, he's busy.
He is.
And we've talked to some of your council members to get their thoughts. One of the reasons we're in front of you tonight informally is we want to hear your thoughts, and we really don't have the ability to talk to you outside of this meeting. You're not elected officials. You are, right? We're trying to get out in front of this before we drop the application on your lap, and we're probably meetings through Thad or through Sean for you to communicate ideas and thoughts and concerns to them and get them to us in writing so that we show up at the meeting next time prepared to answer those things. We will be meeting, as I mentioned, a number of times with school district representatives. I think those will be pretty frequent and interesting meetings. And we want them to be a part of this. And, we acknowledge that the words multifamily development are probably scary to some. We're committed to doing it in a way that is responsible for the schools, and we have some convincing to do with the school district. We recognize that. So, any other constituents that are interested in meeting with us, we will always do that and be as open and honest as we're able to be.
All right, then that goes to my next question. You said you don't expect a lot of students in the multifamily area. Why? I'm curious why. I don't know.
We can speak to experience on this. First of all, I want everybody to know that these are going to be very quality units. These are not, we all have an idea of maybe what's existing in your community or maybe in some parts of Columbus. This is not going to be that. And we gotta convince you guys it's not going to be that. I get it. But things like we have real-world data we can provide. As an example, the Market and Main Street apartments in the center of New Albany, I don't know if you have been over there at the roundabout.
Right.
I believe there's 128 units, and at any particular point in time, since that's been built, there's been 6 to 8 students in 128 units. So there are things you can do to design these in a manner that they are attractive to students, and I mentioned previously lowering the threshold for the minimum square footage in a unit. I can't remember exactly what we said, but I think we said maybe for a one-bedroom, it's 600 square feet. You know, those sorts of things, and limitations on bedrooms and things, and how many units can have 3 bedrooms, which aren't gonna be many. We think we'll need a sprinkling, but those are the sorts of things we wanna put in place within the bounds of the law. There are fair housing laws. But to make sure that we're delivering on what we promised.
Now, square footage helps, but I mean, density of units helps even more. What do you anticipate the density and the number of units across all units or all of these areas to be?
So our proposal, and you know, no one has blessed it, but our proposal is to do 3 units per acre over, you know, multiply times the total acreage, so you're at 1,251 units, I think, in total. Those would be, though, we're not talking about 3 units an acre on a per development basis. You could never do multifamily like that, but our thought is you make the densities, especially close to the mixed use environment, a lot higher, and you eat up the units that way in close proximity to those other amenities. And that's where our head is at the moment.
Okay. Yeah, I know the density will be important, as is the square footage, because obvious reasons. We want to know how many students are going to fit into that area. I'm sure you'll get that question here again a little bit more in depth in a minute, but
Our goal is also to provide data to the school district and obviously to the city as well, to demonstrate comparable projects and get real numbers from those areas and those projects to present to you. And there are ways you can go about that. You know, you typically can't take a survey of your residents if you're a manager of property, but you can go and talk to the bus garage, for instance, at the schools, and say, how many kids do you pick up every day, right? Gives you at least an idea. There are other ways to figure that out, so
Okay.
we'll be bringing backup information as we move forward.
okay. Other questions from our commissioner?
You have any more?
No.
I would say, first of all, the PD district itself, 1164, is that right? Just recently passed. I think it's imperative that everybody, council and planning and zoning, has a hard copy of the amended version, because it's not codified currently. When do we have the codification usually happen? I can't remember.
Once a year, and we're working on the update right now.
You are working on the update, because I think it's also imperative not only for us to have a copy, but to be codified on the website for public view of it, because it is so new, and because this is coming quickly, to give everybody time to digest the document, as well as the application when it comes through. That's the first note that I had, just on that piece.
And I would say it has been codified, it just hasn't been posted to the
That's what I-
website.
yeah.
Okay.
Published.
So that's a great
Published.
call out. What we can do, because of the infrequency of our updating, which obviously has a cost associated with it,
Right.
we choose to only update our website with the new changes that have been implemented once to twice a year. So great call out. What we can do from a city standpoint is make sure we print those off. I believe the last date that was finalized was approximately 30-some days ago, roughly. So
July 20th was the last amended vote.
So after it's voted on by council, it has 30 days to move through, and then after that 30-day period is now codified. So doing
Yeah.
the math and the timing, looks like it is now codified. So we'll go ahead and get some copies out to you all, to the council members, and anybody in the public that I think wants to come in within reason. We may be able to create a link on our website, and I'm speaking for Teresa, but that may be
You just put it in the Dropbox.
I think that would probably be a more user-friendly than killing multiple trees. So we can also do something along those lines to make a link on our website for some of those.
Out there already.
I didn't see a copy of the amended version. That's what I was looking for.
In the ordinances?
Correct.
Published.
I saw the signed ordinance document, but I did not see where in the Dropbox it was attached to that from July 20th, so
You don't see the exhibit?
I don't.
We'll make it user-friendly, just to make sure everybody has
Needs to
good
maybe get us
access.
an email.
Yeah, that's gonna be one people are searching a lot, because that's
Sure.
not gonna be a document people are typically familiar with.
Yeah, it's brand new, so.
I'll take the onus for killing a branch, because I would like a paper copy, please.
Same here.
Environmentalist, man.
Yeah.
I don't know.
I like to know.
Pay for it, but-
I like it in front of me.
But it's just, I would just want to call that out for everybody here, for anybody who has, or just wants to look at it. I want to clarify too, unless this was changed in the amendment, you mentioned two numbers, 285 and 417. PD that we talked about as a minimum of 350. So are we going with the 417?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, so the point I was making is part of the property, I can't do the math in my head, but is already in the city and therefore doesn't need annex, but that 285 does. And together that will
Got it.
constitute the zoning district.
Got it. Okay, so the only thing that's looking at annexation is the 285, but
Correct.
417 for the total PD
Right.
application. All right. This whole thing is very hard to take the emotion out of everything, and you could probably talk to anybody within the city and have that same thing. So trying to marry up what we know as this area to be to what Johnstown is now continues to go through my head. I know a lot of the narrative that you talked about has to do with walkability within this downtown space that is this PD district. The last thing I would want is to create an island that would separate Johnstown from Johnstown. Walkability, traversability still is very, mobility in general is very big in my mind within this space, not to mention the PD place that we're talking about here off of Green Chapel, Duncan Plains, Main 62. So while I applaud the mobility and walkability piece that you've mentioned, I would also stress the need to keep the connection with Johnstown or create what isn't there. Because while yes, we want to bring in other amenities to service essentially this area, for a period of time, we have a lot of great amenities already in town that would welcome that business and those people. So I would hate to cut that off, so.
I'm glad you raised this, and I probably didn't do a very good job of articulating it, but I did touch on briefly that we believe the historic center of town is a jewel, frankly, and it has a lot of potential to even become better. And we want to capitalize on that as well, and we want those businesses to be successful. They were here first, and I mean, who doesn't go to Ghost Rider all the time, even from Albany, right? I mean, it's, we appreciate that comment, and we will do our best as we're planning to make sure that we're keeping that top of mind.
And I didn't say that to insinuate that you didn't.
Sure.
I said it just because knowing the location of this development puts it in an area that makes some of that challenging, some of the same challenging issues that we had before Khyber Run was connected to the rest of everything at that point, which was a mess that we won't go through. But just wouldn't want to see that again for something like this as it's being considered. You talked about traffic. I saw one illustration on the slides you were looking at, talked about the main point of entrance. That's obviously where the roundabout is that you illustrated previously, but just wanted to drive home the need for multiple points of ingress and egress throughout the entirety of the development, which is something we've tried to apply to whatever we've talked about here that's relatively large, to what we've experienced up to this point, but multiple points of ingress and egress for traffic. Architecture, design review board, we have standards. We talk about the identity of Johnstown, historical overlay districts and things like that are all part of what we discuss. Knowing that this is in Johnstown, but not in Johnstown City, want to emphasize again that a lot of what makes Johnstown, Johnstown, besides the people, besides the amenities, and besides the city itself, is the aesthetics, some of the architecture, turn of the century, Victorian, et cetera, and some of those pieces that have been enumerated in some of our planning and strategic documents. So knowing that a lot of what you had here are illustrations just to show scale, show location, show potential, just making sure that that also is taken into account during the final phases when it gets to that point. that also has been something that we've brought up to other large-scale businesses that have come in to talk about different plans and things like that. The big boxes, warehousing, distribution, I know there are limitations with aesthetics versus efficiency and what you do within those boxes, but I think there are things you can do at the end of the day to still make it feel as if it's a part of
Agreed.
Johnstown.
I think, absolutely, we're taking studious notes here, he is. But, things like that, I think making sure we properly treat the view from the public right-of-way is important. To the extent you can put the less desirable sorts of design elements on the rear of a building where it's not visible from off-site, those are things we're totally in tune with. And certainly we want to capitalize on, the historical aspects of Johnstown, even architecturally.
And lighting, we're not the Johnstown we were 10 years ago, 15 years ago, 20 years ago. But light pollution is still something to take into consideration. I still think that there's rural aspects to where we are, though some of that is quickly changing. Downlighting is a big emphasis that we've talked about. I'm not trying to nitpick, just trying to put things out there for future conversation, because a lot of this is just surface as I'm thinking through things that we've discussed before. But the further you get into it, the harder that it is, and I'd be remiss if I didn't call it out. I haven't had any time at the time we've been talking about it to digest the document itself, but that's just why I'm calling things like that out. The multifamily, I think you're right. That is a conversation that always provokes late nights when we talk about multifamily. Mixed use is key. You need to have housing for people that are working, especially when the workforce is that large, that close. We've had conversations with Grow 2020. We've had Morpsey, Columbus, or is it Grow Licking County, Columbus 2020 at the time. Came out 5, 6, 8 years ago or something and talked about, Johnstown, the rural nature, housing within the region. Housing is a key component. The school district is always something that needs to be taken into consideration, and it's said a lot, and it bears continual repetition that, again, those amenities that make Johnstown attractive can quickly go away if not managed in a way that makes them manageable for the future. And so it looks good. What are the underlying numbers and how can it be absorbed within the school district's plan? We've talked a lot about in-kind contribution with land donation for future school sites and things like that. Just things that we spitball and put out there. I know you'll have conversations with the school district. But knowing what everybody knows, there's land out here, but Johnstown doesn't need to be the regional fix for a housing shortage either. So making sure that those conversations are a part of the overall too. One thing that we're trying to leverage, and the income tax piece is a part of it too, so trying to also want to take the income tax burden off of the residents and have an equal share with business as well. And so you don't fix that by necessarily adding in more homes, but you fix that with, some mixed use, but making sure that the ratios are correct as well. So,
And, the interesting thing about your school district is they have the income tax for residents, right? So if done properly, the income tax component on the multifamily could be a boon for the district.
true. There are a lot of mechanisms and tools out there that we haven't necessarily used or entertained before because the scale and scope haven't really been here to have that feasible conversation, in my opinion. So I think there's a lot of ways to look at it, but I'm just trying to bring up the high-level topics. The unit bank transfer that you were talking about, you put in that slide about entitled to a particular number of units. Is the entitled number what you're taking from what the code states as minimum in particular areas, or how do you get to the entitled X number of units for a particular sub-area?
So the way I view it and the way we will propose to set it up is there will be the calculation I walked through earlier will create a total possible number of units. We're gonna wanna apply some of those to sub-area 3 and sub-area 4 just out of the gate. a lot for marketing purposes to say there are some rights there, obviously subject to the final development plan review. And then I anticipate there'll be a sizable number of units sitting in the bank and not applied to anywhere, and which would, all of those things, moving them around would require future action. And so the intent is to sort of let the market know that there's a possibility there, but to get into the details at the later stage of secondary review.
Sure. Okay. I think that's all I have for right now.
All right. Walter, I understand there's some various landowners that's gonna be part of this, and what kind of agreements would be in place so that they would be, would fall under these PD guidelines?
So zoning regulations go with the land. So, essentially our contracts are contingent upon annexation and zoning getting approved. And so, once those things happen, it would trigger my client's obligation to purchase those properties. To the extent it wouldn't come through for some reason, then that property owner is still held to the same standard, and would have to go through a completely new rezoning process in order to change it.
Okay. Infrastructure, there's gonna be additional infrastructure, of course, water, sewer and things. Any anticipation or numbers that can be provided through the process to give some idea? Because, data centers can be a very large user of water, which a lot of people don't know that, but they can be, so.
Yes, I don't know, Jamie, maybe you can answer where we are with evaluating that.
Yeah, the data center world has changed a lot in the last few years. You're right, they historically were large water users. What we're seeing now is the complete opposite, where they're going to an air-cooled system. So we would anticipate, we're working through different modeling exercises for revenue projections for the city as well as water usage. But for any of the property that we showed today, we would assume that those most likely would be air-cooled data centers.
Okay.
Because we realize that Johnstown has a great asset in their water department. They have their own. There's also limited capacity, which is part of the reason why I think our piece to the puzzle and MKSK's larger puzzle about maybe expediting some of our plans and bringing them to market and using some of Johnstown's resources to help bring some catalyst projects to Johnstown and jumpstart that economic development feedback loop.
So kind of get some money coming into prime to pump for what
Exactly.
else is coming, okay.
So we
That's
expect economic
that's a good
development
thing.
will feed more economic development.
Yeah.
But the water, data centers now will most likely be air-cooled, so.
Okay, all right, thank you. Any particular phase order you think things might take place as far as which phase would be first or which part of it would be first? And then, I recognize the market rules on that and
Right.
things, and things can change quickly, as we saw with COVID and other things.
Sure. I think sub-area 1 is right for,
Can you go back to the map
yeah,
while you answer
yeah.
that one too? That might be
Yeah,
helpful.
I think it's slided up.
Thank you. Oh, I think we passed it.
Can I pass it?
Yep, yep. One more. There you go.
There we go, all right. I believe sub-area 1, and then obviously there's actual prospect for sub-area 2B, which is not on our land, but so that's gonna happen relatively quickly. We are committed to making sure that multifamily does not come out of the ground first. We want it to be a meaningful project for economic development to come first. So you have our commitment publicly that will be the first thing that happens. Now, is it possible multifamily could come out of the ground at the same time? Yes, but you will not see multifamily happen first without something going on.
Okay. On the banking that you mentioned, who oversees that process?
So there will be a method in the text for basically accounting for those units. And essentially, as development is approved and permits are issued, we will be required under the text to provide Sean or MKSK or somebody with an accounting of where the units are and how many have been sort of used up.
Yeah.
And if they disagree, they come back to us, and then ultimately both the city and us have to sign the document to confirm that we're all in agreement.
Okay.
Can you go over what just real like one-liners on what the different sections are again?
Yes. So sub-area 1 and 2 are the big employment generating uses and the larger developments that are sort of feeding off the location near Intel.
I guess that's my question is what is like manufacturing and warehousing separate categories here, or are those like one?
They're all
category?
encompassed in that. They'll be in a list of permitted uses. There'll be a table. and,
Okay.
All of those uses will be permitted in
In that,
sub-areas
okay.
1 and 2. 3, well, let's go to 4 first. 4 will be mixed use. That's all, and there'll be a requirement that if you bring residential, you have to bring 2 other uses along with it in the plan, so you know you're gonna get what we're promising. Sub-area 3 would allow standalone multifamily, but also will allow for mixed use as well in case that really takes off and it bleeds up to the north into that site. And then we talked about sub-area 5 and sort of having a couple of options there.
So my thinking was that you don't get as much revenue off of certain types of businesses that are gonna come in there. Because I guess the employment income tax is different for different ones. And so I know that New Albany uses some sort of a matrix on what type of jobs they're looking for. I know this is a little bit different because it's annexation, it's all gonna be additional jobs, but it's something that, we'd like to, are we gonna have any control on who we're landing in here, I guess, is kind of what, or it could be in either, if just the approved uses are the approved uses.
No, no, it would be a very much collaborative process, and this is the start of what I think is many years to come in a long-term partnership and relationship with the city. When it comes to selecting employers, I think there's 2 big things that come into it. One is the tax base and balancing the tax base. So one of the advantages of doing a master plan is that you can balance the tax base, because some users, like a data center, for example, will bring in revenue, and it'll be like an annuity to the city. It'll bring a lot of construction jobs. It won't create a lot of operating jobs, but it'll bring a lot of revenue. That could put you in position to attract, the key employers that are quality jobs, like a biopharmaceutical company, for example. And those are companies that will know an NCA is in place, that's kind of like an HOA on steroid, and then having that NCA in place, you're getting companies that are making 20, 30, 40, 50-year commitments to Johnstown, and you're not getting companies that are gonna move here for, 5-year lease and then leave.
And so I think the new community authority assessment charge is key to kind of balancing things out, because if you have a data center use and there's a handful of jobs comparatively, it certainly pays its way through that charge.
So we would give it like a tax abatement or whatever promotional things we're giving out to attract these businesses, we would approve that beforehand for that entire section? Or would we improve it per project, per building?
In a perfect world, there are parameters in place that allow for those things to be, if you check the boxes, you would have the abatement or the incentive in place. Part of that will be a condition that you have to pay the new community authority
Okay,
charge.
gotcha.
Now, by the way, depending on how we set it up, we'll probably file something on all of our property at once, although it won't trigger the charge. It will say when building starts to go vertical on each parcel, the charge begins, so they'll sort of inherit it with the deed. No other choice.
I like that.
Another one, New Albany's got a pilot payment in lieu of taxes. Does that play any role in this?
From our standpoint, that's a matter as between the city and the school district.
Okay.
We have a role in this, but, demonstrating the financial, strength of the projects, but I think that's something that's gonna have to be talked about and negotiated between those 2 folks.
Okay.
Dad, what's our timeline for approving the preliminary plat once the application's submitted?
Preliminary plat or
Or
preliminary
preliminary PUD, or what?
PD
yeah.
district plan?
PD district, sorry.
Nope.
I'll let you know.
When you talk to an attorney, they'll give you your answer, but it might not be the one you want.
We're looking what, October at the soonest, is what he said?
Is there a time requirement for us to finalize that process?
There is, I'll have to pull it up in chapter 1164, but the final approval of that wouldn't come until final approval of that by council wouldn't come until the annexation is complete.
Right.
So we're talking October-ish, right? So if we want our community authority parameters to be in place by the time we approve the preliminary district, then we're gonna have to know exactly what projects to pigeonhole on a pretty tight timeline here. So we'll just have to, if the community authority is gonna fund schools or roads, then those decisions are gonna have to be made pretty quickly.
Yeah, I think we can,
Do you guys have plans on what your ideas are for that?
the document that creates the community authority organization itself in the district is always pretty broad in terms of its scope on what it could be used for. And that won't be up to us as the private developer, it'll be up to the NCA board ultimately in consultation with the city. And so, my view is we can get that NCA set up and maybe we're in a position where there's an agreement between us as the developer and the city and the NCA as to how that money is used. Or maybe that comes later, but it will be written broadly enough that it will leave everybody's options open with the ultimate say being the NCA board.
I thought in New Albany, they had it where it was specific, like a school and a specific road, like two different, pretty specific projects.
Well-
But my memory could be wrong.
Tom Ruby, so I apologize for being late. I'm a single dad tonight, juggling kids and priorities, so I apologize for that. Yes, in New Albany, again, that structure was put in place. It wasn't driven by the private developer. It was driven by cooperative agreements between the city, the township, and the school district. And it funded projects for each of those entities.
Okay.
We anticipate the same type or very similar type of structure occurring here, so that how those dollars are spent and allocated is a community decision, not a developer.
Yeah, the reason I get into it is because we have a lot of roads and infrastructure that I think needs some major improvement, and I would like to have a plan. And before we do the preliminary approval, because after that, like I said, our process leaves us out of the loop almost entirely. So it seems like that would be an important piece for us to have some understanding on before we approve that preliminary.
I believe that's correct, a accurate statement. I believe the way the draft that you will have a chance to take a closer look at anticipates providing traffic analyses and those types of things commensurate with more specific projects for you guys to evaluate.
If I could jump in a little bit. So with a project of this scale, and what we're all looking at, there's a fair amount of utilities and roadways that Aaron mentioned. So obviously, the developer is triggering some of that, but that also is not going to be just utilized by that particular development. So taking those into consideration whenever we're laying this thing out, tremendous amount of utility, roadways, things that are going to be all part of that. I think that NCA money could be utilized to help pay for some of that infrastructure. So in order to get some of this off the ground, there's going to be bonds that have to be issued as far as loans in order for us to be able to run water and sewer lines, as well as roadway infrastructure, like I said, that aren't specific to necessarily that development, but holistically that whole area. So I just want to put that little insert in there that New Albany is a really cool model, but it's not always the exact same model. They obviously had some other key elements or players that were associated with some of that development. We may not have those same advantages, is how I'll phrase it. So it doesn't mean we can't do these things. It just means we're going to have to maybe structure them a little bit differently. So providing utilities and things like that are going to be a little bit more complicated. But there is a huge ROI on these types of debts that are issued because, as you all heard, the economics that can be created from that really start to steamroll, and Walter put it great, and that is prime that pump, the economic engine that can be created. So backfilling those utilities, but you got to get them off the ground. Typically, you go to any lender that wants to lend you money, they say, what's your guarantee? You're probably going to have to point to something that's concrete, and the only thing that's concrete is gonna be some of those
I'm
NCAs.
following, yeah. with
Or
the-
TIFs.
The
We'll be-
bond.
we're looking at
so the new
TIFs,
community authority would approve back the bond, and that's, I would fund the roads, okay, I'm following.
And I don't wanna get too far, cause it's
Yeah,
a really
it's a lot
large
to wrap your
matrix
head
to
around.
work with, but I don't want everybody leaving the room feeling like we're gonna be able to, as New Albany did, I think they bought a fire truck, which was really important to them, and I think that's great, but I think we've got a little bit heavier lifting to do out the gate, and then we can really start to have some cool fun, if that's the desire later. So, and that's with any development. That's not with this development, that's with anything that comes along. So I'm not trying to rally this or anything like that, but when we're looking at our infrastructure, I'm with you, Jesse. We've got some roads and things like that that really need to be addressed, and I'll take my unselfish plug of, we have an income tax that we're trying to unburden
We're not gonna
residents.
go, we're not gonna go into that infomercial, Mike. We did that at council last week.
Well, I will say though, that
so-
there's one good thing about, Green Chapel is being completely improved by the city of New Albany. I know the TID is looking at other opportunities, so, hopefully there'll be
Right
other
up
plans
this,
along.
yeah.
The other thing I would note is that if and when a formal application comes before the commission, Chapter 1164 spells out the criteria by which that should be evaluated for the commission's recommendation. So those will all be spelled out and may or may not include methods for payment of infrastructure versus how infrastructure will be laid out and provided in that proposed development.
All right.
If I may really quickly.
Yes,
just
please.
address a couple
Yep.
points. So first, kind of some of the process questions, Jesse, I know you had a few. This process was designed and written in a way that allows an applicant to come in at multiple touch points on purpose. And so this is kind of if you read through the procedures section in chapter 1164-06, one of the first steps is this concept plan. So what was brought before you this evening is this concept plan. So I recommend taking this as, are the general layout of the uses acceptable? Are you comfortable having residential and retail uses in sub-areas 3 and 4? Are you comfortable with having those employment-based uses in sub-area 1? Kind of the very big picture topics to analyze tonight. That gives the applicant the ability to go back without furthering all of this design and writing work and things like that on a path that you all aren't really comfortable with. So I would recommend trying to keep in mind those bigger picture items tonight. In terms of the time frame, the P&Z has, after a formal application is submitted, and what that means is the application is complete, all the documents are submitted, ready to be reviewed, the P&Z the application has to be put on the P&Z's agenda between 20 and 40 days from the time that application is submitted. However, that does not mean you have to act on it within 20 to 40 days. You just have to begin the hearing process. If you need to table it to either get more information, make further decisions, have further discussion, you're more than able to do that. And then Ben, I know you had some questions about the unit bank. While I have some suggestions that I will talk to the applicant offline about, that is a very common tool that is used to regulate overall development within one of these large projects, is to evaluate the entirety of the project on whatever the unit is per basis. Aaron mentioned 3 units per acre, which yields about 1,250 units across this development. It's pretty common to use some sort of mechanism or tool to make sure that you have control and expectation of where those units will go within that development. So I don't think from that standpoint that's anything that's out of the norm for these sort of projects. And I think that's all I have for now, unless you all have any other questions.
Yeah, I was gonna sum things up real quick
I got
before we
one more.
open for,
I
go
got
ahead.
one more. Do all the sections of the PD have to be contiguously or no? There's no requirement for that, is there?
What do you mean by all this, like all the different land areas?
Yeah.
No, there is a provision baked into this that allows for some satellite property to be considered.
That missing teeth clause, they can be within a half mile.
Are you guys gonna utilize the property
That's after,
on the
yeah.
other side of
Yeah.
Mink as part of this district, or what are you guys planning on doing with that piece of property?
The ground on the east side of Mink is not part of this application. Again,
It's to be determined.
To be determined,
Okay.
as well as property further to the west. I mean, this is
Yeah.
our first foray. We're excited about this project. I think that it brings all kinds of opportunities for the community. and hope this is the start of a long-standing relationship. So what happens to the west, to the east, to the north, all
Okay.
to be determined.
I just didn't know if you guys had plans on, because the way our process works too is I think you can add in you can add in as much as you want to the PD district after the preliminary approval is
Yeah.
granted. So it can grow a lot too.
We believe
We don't
it
have any
will
control,
have
we don't
full-
have any controls there in place to protect ourselves on that.
Keep in
That's
mind-
not,
Yeah, go ahead.
yeah. While there is not a minimum acreage requirement after the initial 350 acres is approved, any additional acreage is subject to your recommendation and
Goes
council.
through a new process, okay. I
Because
forgot about that,
technically,
okay.
it is an
So it-
amendment to the original PD, so therefore it's not.
Okay,
it's-
all right.
Yeah.
That's why I was worried about
Sure.
that
The other
part,
thing
that part of the
It's
process.
not
but
an
I forgot.
automatic
Okay. All right,
approval.
okay.
The
For
expansion
additionally-
would have to be by us. Someone else couldn't come in and attach. It has
Yeah,
to be
yeah.
common ownership or control, so make sure that, no one else piggybacks on it.
Okay, anything else from the,
So in the generality of the layout, to me, I like almost all of it. The only part that I see is the purple part with the Port Authority. Is that a perfect place for a warehouse? And, I don't know, because that's kind of the entrance, 62 is the entrance to Johnstown, and that's a pretty main intersection to have a big warehouse. It is back a little bit off the road. Was that, sorry.
I was just gonna say, before the commission gets into deliberation and comment, do you want to hear public comment?
we're gonna go into this in a little bit. We'll get into,
We're
we'll
gonna
get
come
into,
back to talk
yeah,
to
we'll
us
get into
again.
the weeds there a little bit. I don't think that we're getting too far into deliberation tonight. I think we're keeping it pretty broad level. So I definitely don't wanna delve too far into this.
Well, the application's coming next week, so I think
Yeah,
that if we
you're
have
right.
any say, we should say it now, right?
Yeah, I want to let public weigh in before we
Okay.
give our final thoughts here,
You're the
but
man.
I know, at least for me, you're gonna see this in the framework plan, spoiler alert, but I think this county has identified that they don't like density, they don't like sprawl. So I don't know how you get both of those, but, I think you have a unique space here that we're gonna be able to do a lot with. After we hash out what we need as far as density, what works for the city, what works for the school district, the tax base, all the above. I think you have to look at the architecture, as Ben mentioned. This has been one of my key points. I think as part of this process, the design review and zoning didn't necessarily get as much of a seat at the table as we may have liked. I think it's important to make sure that they are passing, recommendations as they can, as they see areas where they fit in. I hope that our staff and MKSK are taking a look at them, and making sure that architectural features that are prevalent in the city do make it down to that area. We want a nice, smooth transition. Traffic flow in and out of Johnstown. Someone famously said that road has two ends. I know people have heard that before, so we want to make sure that that works both ways. With the density in that area, I think it's nice that we are creating roads in the area. If you do have density in this area, I know that we're planning to be an entirely planned city. So if we do structure a lot of density in this area, I think it's important that we look at other areas and identify that density will not be in other areas. Because we do have a unique perspective here of saying we're creating roads. So if you do stick a lot of density there, it's easier to fix these roads than it is to do up here, I think. So, in looking at the areas, I do have some things I'd look at on the other areas, as well as, when we mentioned the bank, I am a bit apprehensive of the process on that. I definitely would like to analyze that a little bit more. It's hard to do tonight, just in a brief presentation. But I know that's a lot possibly to juggle for our staff, and not that I trust our staff fully, but, proportionately, you have our staff working with much larger staffs that are coming in to develop all this. So proportionately, it's a lot to juggle, so I want to make sure we're ready for that. I want to thank our applicant that's on later on for being very patient with us as we work through this. But I want to go ahead and open to the public, starting off with our school board officials, and then on to other members here. If you're from one entity together, try to elect a spokesman real quick to articulate your points. And we will go through this in a fairly concise manner. I've learned a lot about opening to the public in the last couple of years, so we want to keep this on point.
Thank you, Councilmember Green, Commission members. I'm Tim Swager, School Board President for Johnstown Monroe. I appreciate the opportunity to speak. We just saw this with you, for the first time, so we don't have a lot of opinion as of this point. We got a lot of questions, much like you guys do. Kind of looking at it, you're right. When we look at multifamily, we get nervous, rightfully so, because our past multifamily, when we were given some estimates of how many per unit, we were told like 0.5, and we ended up with 1.5, in actuality, once they got built. So we really want to work with the developer and make sure we look at those and really look at real life examples of what they've built and what we're really getting from them, not an estimate based on, some of those things. So we do look forward to that. One of the issues for us is the commercial property side of that. Whatever economic agreement is what supports the residential. So it is critical to us, as you mentioned, some of the commercial stuff starting first. For the school side, we can't add any more kids. I mean, our high school, 40, 50 kids from capacity at this point. So to build a new high school, we need $50 million and 100 and some acres. So we're not getting that from this one development, you know what I mean? So we have to build up capital for years to be able to support that type of an investment. And we've made a commitment as a school board that our current residents shouldn't have to face any additional school taxes to support growth. They shouldn't pay less, but they shouldn't have to pay any more. So that's kind of how we're going after these conversations as school board. And we started some compensation conversations with Sean that we're going to start working on for these types. It wasn't specific to this development, it's just an overreaching compensation agreement. But that compensation agreement will tell us whether or not we can support residential and at what level. So these types of multifamily, our current tripartite agreement that we have in New Albany that everyone references, it doesn't allow any housing. You know what I mean? So when we reference that, there is no housing aspect of that. So if you're looking for it, it's not there because that was based on commercial property and doesn't have any housing to reference. So it's new for us, and that's what we're trying to figure out, how this plays out for us and the number of students that we'll get and what that causes us to do. And so the density is critical. For us, density is how many students are we getting. And this development, from a school standpoint, we feel like it sets the standard of expectation for what goes on beyond this. So it's critical that we get this one right, because if it doesn't work here, you're going to lose because we're just going to get more of whatever didn't work. So I do thank the opportunity to speak, let you guys know we're looking at, it's all new to us. We don't have an opinion at this point because there's too many unknowns for us to have an opinion.
Will you guys be working through your agreements and stuff during the school board meetings going forward, or is that something that happens more in the background, just out of curiosity?
So we had a conversation with the New Albany Development Company at 4 o'clock today when I heard about the meeting, and and we've invited them to a meeting here in September to really have a conversation. We typically will go into executive session to discuss some of it and then come out in public and certain aspects of financial and legal terms. We'll do that in executive session, but then we'll come out in the public and discuss where we're at. So we're going to start those conversations as well. But really, for us as a school district, the compensation agreement and whatever agreement we do with these lands here determine whether or not we can support any additional housing, because we've never given any residential side to this conversation yet. So that's the new aspect for us to look at.
And I don't think that our approval process includes whether or not the schools are accounted for or not, but I'm glad to hear that they're working with you guys, and hopefully we can get your guys a green light before we have to make a decision.
Yes.
Preferably.
Yep. Yeah, we'd appreciate that as well. Yep. Does anyone have any questions?
Any questions from the
I've got a lot more, but I'll let you off the hook.
All right. Appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, further public comment? All right. I was shocked there for a second.
I know. I'm
Cheryl Robertson. I was a former council member for 8 years. I was chair of the Economic Development Committee for Johnstown. The purple, number 2A and 2B. I was on the committee when we planned that, when we worked with the Port Authority, when we got it annexed in, and that was a fight to get it annexed in. We had a lot of people that was not happy when we changed the zoning on this. But there was one thing we said, we promised, and we did not want as a committee, is to have a distribution center there. We wanted a manufacturer or an office building, but not a distribution center. They're not attractive. And one of you said, maybe it was you, Jesse, right where it's located, coming into Johnstown, that is not a good look. And the New Albany company, I respect all of you. I've met you before. But I'm just saying, if you don't want this to look, if you don't want this look in New Albany, we don't want it in Johnstown. So just keep that in mind. if you would. So I guess I gotta be the hard guy here, but that's how we feel. So anyway, thank you.
Thank you. All right, I believe there's another public comment.
So,
Could you state your name for us?
Yeah, Andrea Ford, and I live off of Green Chapel. So you started out discussing the broader picture, which was the purple triangle. And then you've kind of pared it down to this area here, which is relevant to where I live. But you also talked about, you want to plan this out, it's not a piecemeal kind of thing, but I see a lot of white space in there, which leads to what's going to happen with that. Is that going to be piecemeal? Are there plans for that haven't been revealed yet?
Well, the white
That doesn't
spaces,
look like
Those
that.
the white
owners
space
haven't
is still
sold.
very important. I want to make that clear.
They
There are
haven't
people
sold
living
yet.
there.
So those are individual landowners that haven't.
Yeah.
So you can't make them do something that they don't want to do, so.
Correct, but I
they
guess if you're planning the zoning for this area, are you also, you can't zone for somebody who isn't agreeing to.
I mean, I assure you there are realtors and development experts working around the clock to do something with all of those lots. I know that for sure, but no, they're very important because there are currently people living there in many of them. So,
I live there, so.
So you might
and
want
as they come in, I would assume they're going to come in as larger parcels because it's hard to do something with 5-acre lots.
And you won't have zoning unless you're included in the annexation application or have a separate one, because you won't get a zoning designation until you're
Right.
in the city. So those properties won't be
Right,
zoning.
so I
but-
guess that goes to my point, which is, this doesn't really seem like a planned district if you're only like picking pieces of it at this point.
You can only help so much with how properties come into the city. So currently, and I want to make it clear, as people have said here in this chair in the past, we only care about what's inside that yellow line. That's not the case. We're definitely caring about what happens to these, but we can only do so much as they annex into the city. So we're,
And I understand that, but I guess that goes back to my point of, if you're gonna start buying up properties and trying to zone and plan a district, you've got like,
in our comprehensive plan, I think some of that is addressed too. You're gonna see certain areas on that map, and I don't know if we can go back to that map, if it'll help too much, but I know it's a little blurry in that area.
And I
Yeah.
would say that, like, planned district is a term of art in zoning.
Right.
And so, whereas referencing for this particular application is just those properties where there is a petition for annexation.
Right.
Or it is already within the city of Johnstown and is seeking this rezoning to the planned district. It doesn't necessarily mean that there's some, broad plan that covers a particular region.
Which you
For
like your
anything that's
property
not
being-
annexed or not currently being annexed, I mean, it would fall under this map or a future land use type map. It basically is something we'd like to do someday. Until it actually shows up, we can't do anything with it.
They would probably
And
love to
again,
buy
I
your
know
property
that-
and fill in that white space though, I bet.
What?
They would probably love to buy your property and fill in that white space, I bet.
You would think so, but it doesn't appear to be the case.
Oh, interesting.
So, I guess that's, I guess you're only planning around certain things, and so it's just not really a comprehensive plan from what I see. And you could have somebody else come in and random things come in and pick up the 5-acre, 10-acre properties, and then you have this mismatch of just.
I'm happy to.
Yes, if you could.
Appreciate the comment. I guess what I would say is, I think a really great provision of your PD code was the fact that someone else cannot come in, is not associated with the applicant, and come in and try to do a PD themselves. They'd have to meet the 350 acre
Right.
threshold. So the first thing would be, you'd have to have someone come in and have to probably pick a straight zoning district and, pick one of those, and you have the ultimate say as to whether that fits with your plan or not. And it will go through the same process as here. And, I think the likelihood of some of those zonings getting done versus something that would be an additive to this is probably much smaller. It'd have to be pretty perfect to fit within the mold, but we're kind of setting the table here. Of course, we would like to own some of those other properties and fill in the missing teeth, but we don't. And so what we have before us right now is there are decisions being made by Intel suppliers as we speak as to where they want to go. And sort of had to pick a point in time. We wanted to be respectful of what you're doing as a city and planning, but we don't want to miss our window either. So,
Right.
This is what we control at the moment.
Do you think you're gonna be able to compete with New Albany and the business park, all the business park space that they have out there for some of those major Intel suppliers? Because there's a lot of warehouses, and that one company has a whole huge farm that's still ready to go. So,
The answer is yes.
all right.
There are, look, this is a lot about speed to market. There are lots of opportunities and unique characteristics.
Okay.
To being on the north side of the road. I do want to address concerns that were raised by you as well, and I think Aaron addressed many of those appropriately. Sometimes there are folks that want to be a part of this, sometimes there are folks that don't want to be a part of this. I've heard tonight some of the commission members talking about light pollution. Those are the kinds of things that need to be included in this zoning text, because not all of the property owners here want to be a part of this. And if this were to come to fruition, there are lots of things and commitments that need to be made early on in the process so that there's a clear level of understanding of what the impact of this may have on adjacent property owners. Light pollution is just one of them. Building heights, densities, setbacks, corridor treatments, road corridor treatments. So that's a layer of detail that will certainly have to be addressed to this community satisfaction.
And the other question I had was, are there some actual prospects in place, right, for these areas you're
They're never gonna tell.
planning?
There are not. This is the start of what we hope to be a long-standing relationship with this community. We have not gone out to anyone to facilitate this until we know what the city of Johnstown, the Johnstown School District, and the community as a whole need and want to be a part of this. So,
And frankly, there's no market until we have some of these details in place, because they're like, well, how do we know we're gonna get that done, right?
Yeah.
So we have to sort of do this stuff first.
Yeah, and Andrea, the first question we get when we talk to suppliers in other parts of Central Ohio is, what's the zoning and utility situation? And if we can't answer those two, we can't get to the other conversations, whether it's about design or parking requirements or workforce or circulation traffic or tax abatements. It always starts with zoning and utilities. And to get Johnstown's hat in the ring with some of these economic development opportunities, those are the two boxes we need to kind of start
Right.
getting some clarity on.
Okay, so then, my last comment then would be, this annexation will be approved, right? Water, that's the assumption. Water and sewer will become available, likely, to Big Chapel Road. And so, will it be available to everybody? Or, I asked this the other day at city council, and it was kind of dependent upon how things went, on how you would run that.
Yes, it's dependent on, first of all, the alignment of those utilities, and Aaron, I believe those are regulated by the OEPA, the Army Corps of Engineers. If
Sean, we
a
can jump in on that one
property is
here in a second.
within, as I recall, if a home that's on well and septic is within a certain lineal foot distance from those utilities, and they have to be, first of all, annexed into the city, and then they would be required to hook into those. They would be available, but if you were within a certain dimension, those environmental protection agencies require those connections. But the first and foremost piece is annexation into the municipality.
And you really, would be very rare for anybody being annexed against their wills. The procedures that are in place now as compared to 20, 25 years ago when the law change means that, you know, you're not gonna be brought in against your will. And politically, that's not what anyone wants to do anyway.
But that'll be an important issue when this goes, part of the negotiation with council is who is able to hook into what water lines. So I like that point, something that we're all gonna have to start watching the city council meetings too.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
If I can, very quickly, I would just like to add, because we're dealing with a lot of regulatory tools that are very new to all the community. The growth framework is a component of the comprehensive plan that establishes an opinion on how Johnstown would like lands around the municipality to develop. That comp plan does not specify who develops it or in what what parcels develop first. So your comprehensive plan is your long-term statement. It may take 25 or 30 years to achieve that statement. Your zoning is the day-to-day tool that actually implements how property is developed. And so we're dealing with two different and very new things, but I just wanted to make it clear that the framework is the expression of the city telling potential property purchasers and current property owners, here's what we as a city would like to see in these various areas around the city. The plan development is a zoning tool that was also recently implemented to accommodate these large-scale developments. And when I say large-scale, to put some perspective on this, potentially this 417-acre total development represents almost 20% of the total land area in Johnstown. And I don't mean that to scare anyone, I just mean that to provide some sense of scale that this will have an impact on the community. And so this is a pretty big first step in implementing that vision, but there will be multiple of these. So just because not the entirety of that triangular piece that is just north of Green Chapel is included in this PD does not mean that anything is not working as intended. So there will be pieces and parts of these that develop at different times, but overall, this growth framework projects out what is anticipated to be generally within that area, in this case in purple on the screen. And so I just wanted to kind of try to provide some differentiation between the various tools that we're using here and what documents they're related to.
Could you create a contract that obligates them to give water to properties that they run water through? Like they could run a water line, they may have to run a
That'd
water
be a
line
better
through one of the
question
white
for
ones.
safety and service later on.
I
I
can't
mean,
answer.
That'd be a better conversation for council later on.
Yeah, that ultimately would be a council type of decision.
Yeah.
I didn't think
Not a land
annexation-
use decision.
I didn't think annexation was a requirement
It's not.
for water use.
It's
You
not.
can have a contract with the city, be outside of the municipality. I think typically, right now, it's twice the rate if you're outside of the city. So I don't think, you don't have to be annexed in.
Yeah, the city could choose to provide water service at
Right.
whatever price it chooses.
I think it's codified at
Outside
2
of the
times the
city.
current rate if you're outside the municipal.
But when we get to provision of utilities and the price therefore, it gets to a council type of decision and not a planning and zoning commission
Yeah, I
matter.
just want to clarify that annexation piece.
All right. All right, so further comment, public comment. Was there any others? Yes, sir.
Sure, I just had a couple of things that I just put out there. My name's Adam Wheeler, I live out on Miller Road. And I have a background in city planning, so I had just some thoughts for like the future as far as as the plan goes. As far as looking at the road network, and Commissioner Lee had talked about lots of ingress and egress spots, but I'm kind of specifically thinking of ways to connect all the way through, ways ways to connect through to the existing roadway network so that there are alternative routes to get around. Sometimes you get into these developments and it seems like where they would cause traffic problems if there's not alternative ways to get around. That's kind of the issue in the middle of the town. At our crossroads or two main streets, there's not a lot of other ways, good ways to get through town in either direction. So just making sure we have alternative, creating alternative routes in some of these big developments like this to help keep traffic from getting really bad. Another thought I had kind of related to what she was talking about, worrying about the white space around, is just looking at where you're putting the open space, using that to save some of the more environmentally precious areas, or to use it as a buffer around some of the existing homeowners that are nearby and that sort of thing. I just noticed on the one image that you'd shown that it seemed like, you had like a large open space that was along Green Chapel Road, and I think I'd, rather see that closer to the existing residents versus right across the street from Intel, where, I think people aren't quite as worried about how they'd be impacted by this. So, just using that as a buffer zone around the existing uses around that area. That's all right.
Thank you. All right. So briefly, any other public comment out there? All right. Hearing none, I will close public comment. And any other feedback from our commissioners, now that you've hashed out your ideas, heard the public, specific feedback that these gentlemen can take back as they craft their application?
I'm anxious to see the application.
Right.
All 80 pages.
80 pages. Gonna love it. So, well, hopefully that has given you guys something to think about. Do you have any questions to help clarify your work ahead?
I don't believe so.
Okay.
Appreciate the back and forth and from the community and from all of you. I would encourage you, I've talked to your attorney. I don't know that I can talk to any of you directly other than Ryan, but happy to use other means to answer your questions so that you're not assuming things while you're reviewing the application. So if there's a way either to filter it through Sean or somebody else and get it to us, we'll do our best to be, to get you answers in advance of the next meeting if you need them.
Okay. All right, perfect.
Thank you. Appreciate the information.
All right. Well, at this time, we'll go ahead and move on to item number 7.
Chairman, can I ask for maybe a 5-minute recess?
We could definitely do a 5-minute recess. I know that we chat a bit more than most zoning boards out there probably do, but we like to keep it open and allow for comment. So
I'll make a motion for a 5-minute recess.
I will second that motion. Roll call, or all? Can we just do all in favor?
Aye.
All in favor? Aye.
I have to pee, and it's cold in here.
Hey, you're right between the lines.
All right.
Oh, yeah.
Tough to see the whole presentation that way.
I'm tired. Yeah, I hear you.
Okay, you're back on.
All right. So we have to make a motion to reconvene. Okay, or to end recess.
You can just state it.
Yeah.
You can just,
All right,
you just
we
state
are-
that recess is over.
Want to make sure we're all right. Recess is over.
It's like a bell or something.
So, we will get back into item number 7 on the list here. The review and recommendation for 110 South Main Street. And again, I want to thank you for sticking with us. A lot of important information tonight, and we wanted to make sure that we gave you ample time without a massive crowd to be able to speak and work this out. So I will have our staff and our legal advisor fill us in on the procedure here, because this is not a common procedure that we do in zoning. And then we will have our applicant speak.
Sure. And I'll jump in, and Thad, if I'm going sideways at any point, feel free to interject. But in our ordinance, we have 1131.06, expiration revocation of zoning certificate issued under a conditional use provision. Recently, we had a conditional use provision that was granted recently, and in this particular piece of the ordinance, there is also, and I've highlighted it, the Planning and Zoning Commission may revoke the zoning certificate if it finds, based upon written evidence by any citizen or official of the village, a violation of this ordinance and/or written terms and conditions upon which approval was based. So, going back through the minutes, there was a lot of emphasis given to the transient business locating solely on the second floor, and no use of the downstairs for any type of transient use. So whenever the city got notified that there was maybe some inconsistencies with that, we have a due diligence to then bring that through the proper channels. The proper channel is, according to our ordinance, back to the Planning and Zoning Commission for the opportunity of a revoke, of it being revoked as far as the conditional use permit that was issued. I have the details in here, but I think it was about 3 or 4 months ago that it was granted. Not that that's necessarily relevant, but any other questions I can try to go through. We're supposed to present evidence as stated in the code, so what I've done is copied the minutes from all of the meetings that led up to that conditional use, and then also the evidence that we have received that would appear that that particular use is being used on both stories rather than exclusively for the second story of that particular structure. So with that, I'll be quiet. I don't know if Thad or Trevor has anything to add, and I'll open it up to them if they want to include themselves on it.
I would just, Sean, to your knowledge, is the evidence presented in the packet the truth to the best of your knowledge, and is that something you would swear or affirm to?
So the evidence that I have was given to me in written form, so it is to my best of my knowledge, this represents the specific 110 South Main structure. So based on the evidence that is in here, and I can highlight the piece that is concerning guests will have access to the first and second floor of the property. That's one item that highlights and stands out specifically. There's other mentions about utilization of the downstairs kitchen. So those are other pieces of evidence that if this is a representation of 110 South Main, which upon the evidence that I have, I would believe it is. So, yes.
All right, we'll go ahead and bring our applicant up, if that's the proper term in this. I don't believe it is, but.
So I'm going to reintroduce myself. I'm Jackie Hudson. I'm here with my husband Ryan, and also our house manager, who just moved here, graduated with her MBA, Bailey. I'm the owner of 110 South Main Street. I'm also co-owners with David Hirsch of Atrium Apparel Corporation, located right down the street on Commerce Boulevard. We employ over 70 people, mostly from Licking County, with a heavy handful of them as longtime Johnstown residents. We operate out of a 250,000 square foot warehouse and distribution center, pay taxes to the city. I'm invested not only in the financials of this community, but emotionally as well, with the hopes of preserving the charm of the city, the character of their homes, and serving the town with a unique and thoughtfully curated space to gather and to celebrate. Can we see if we're able to get any of?
I think you have to take it out and put it back in. Is that right, Sean?
It usually works if you do that, yeah.
That's how we fix things.
Yep, there it goes.
If buying this property was about money, we would have flipped the house long after a renovation to the highest bidder, which most likely would have been a bank, a law office, or maybe even Intel, who would have proceeded to commercialize the space, thus changing the historical integrity of the home, tearing out the beautiful backyard and barn to create more parking spaces, which would have turned and caused a lot more traffic in and out of our driveway, which was one of the concerns that the council had with our short-term rental. But that was never our intention. Coming out of our last meeting, we were not given very clear direction on next steps, but with some meandering, we ended up reaching out to Jim Blair, who was very willing to work with us. He proceeded to help us through the commercial use process for Johnstown, which would grant our tenants official access to our bottom floor. By access, I'm not saying that they are meant to be dwelling down there, sleeping down there. This is purely to be able to use a bathroom, a kitchen, or a family room space. I have that zoning certificate permit right here as well that I was issued. We did the work, paid the fees, he walked our property, submitted parking schematics, and again, have this letter in hand now. He told us we were in the clear, able to start running our business as planned, gave us a handshake and wished us good luck. We were then later followed up by an email from Sean stating there was additional work to be done, which we took very seriously. But at no time were we aware that our Johnstown zoning certificate permit that we had issued from Jim was void and that we had to cease doing business. Immediately following the email from Sean, we reached out to Licking County, who suggested we hire an architect to help us through this process. All things we've been doing and been in works of doing, been costing us more time and definitely more money along the way here. As of last week, we learned from our architect that in order to commercialize our space, which was the solve for how we can have our upstairs approved tenants to utilize the downstairs space, it will require major structural changes to the property, including removal of the green space and barn to create more parking spots for a business model that we do not even want, but rather feels like jumping through hoops to turn our single-unit residential property into a space that allows our guests to utilize the downstairs. On top of that, it could cost us tens of thousands of dollars to change the structure of the inside of our property to meet commercial code, ruining the historical charm and character of the home. I don't think this is what Johnstown really wants, to destroy a late 1800s home for the sake of semantics on a code that does not take into account the type of property that we are trying to work out of. To address the issue at hand, I completely understand the want for commercial buildings on the main drag to only have upstairs accommodations, leaving the first floor tenants available for stores, restaurants, and other local businesses. I think this is a great idea and protects the potential for local establishments in the future. But I cannot understand how this logic pertains to a residential property. On top of this, we bought this property in September before the new code was in effect, at least publicly for our knowledge. So we were not even aware of this until after the purchase of the home, after we had started renovations, that there may be some hurdles. And we unfortunately had no idea what we were really walking into here. Today, we have Johnstown families, a mother, for example, who has been teaching at the local high school for years, calling to book our space for her daughter's bridal party. They see the charm and the ambiance of what we have created and want their memories, their pictures of their special day to be in our space. We have vendors who are looking to rebook as they frequently sell at the Vintage Market Days Antique Fair right down the street in Croton, and they have no other local establishments that can comfortably house 8 guests. Our current guest is a world-renowned author and psychologist, flown in from the UK, who is here on special business, handpicked by the City of Columbus Police Task Force to help train our police on how to better control riots and make it safer for all of us when we're attending large-scale events. He's at our house because his previous accommodations were lackluster, to say the least, and he needed a space to unwind and slow down. He has come to love Johnstown and plans to stay here on all his subsequent visits, assuming he's given the right to do that. He's also dined at local establishments, filled up his tank right down the street, adding to the economy of Johnstown. He told me as soon as he stepped into our house that he immediately felt at home. These are the types of guests we've built for this space, and these are the types of guests we're here to serve. So now I'm here as a business owner, asking the council for their help to find an appropriate solution for my residential property in the approved GCC 1 commercial district. I'm asking the council to help me help this city and create a space that will preserve the history and integrity of this home and support the needs of the local community. I'm asking you to be open-minded and work with me on solutions versus violations. One creative solution, for example, would be to approve a variance that would allow my transient residential guests the ability to use the downstairs. Again, I'm not talking sleeping accommodations. I'm talking about access to the kitchen and a family room. Another solution could be piggybacking off of what Granville has done, which is cap the number of full house, top and bottom floor, resident transient permits granted per zone. So then this doesn't get escalated and get out of hand. My point is there are solutions that can work for us both, I believe, if you're willing to work with me on it. So I'm here asking for your help, collaboration, support, all the duties I know you take very seriously, so that my business and I can continue to serve this great community with what they are asking for, while also protecting the history and charm of the property at the same time. Thank you for listening.
Thank you. All right. At this time, I will go ahead and open to our zoning commission for questions. I want to make it clear, the last time that we were in here discussing this, I had stated, at least from my position, that I thought we would be back in this situation in a couple months, which is why I voted how I voted at the time. It should have been whether to decide to have an Airbnb or not have an Airbnb without so many stipulations. And it became a project that was so blurred by the end of it that it didn't resemble what it was intended to be originally, which is why I voted no in the first place. But we added a lot of stipulations, and I want to go through those stipulations to see where we're at on this.
Sure.
So the original provisions in this, could we read those off? If anybody has those handy. The conditions on this.
I can tell you it was
So-
parking signs, which
I'll-
are,
I have them from the
perfect.
minutes. So we have conditions of 4 parking spaces for the upstairs transient business, 1 per room.
Correct?
Second, that chapter 1171.24 parking spaces allowed in GCC not be allowed. Third, that transient use is second floor only with the exception of guest entrance and exit. And fourth, that chapter 1175.12 parking of commercial vehicles in a residential district, allowances of 1175.12 not be allowed. And 5, install signage warning of pedestrians.
We have both of those. We have parking signage up as well as when you back out, there's a sign that also says be, like, again, cautious of pedestrians.
So in terms of violating those conditions, we're solely on the condition of the downstairs use that's being violated?
Correct.
I just wanted to make that clear where we were. For
Which
everybody.
again, I have to.
For everybody watching at home too.
That's the one I'm aware of, put it that way. I don't know if
they
there's
are.
been
And
any
again, we were
violations
not
of
trying to deliberately violate.
Right.
We were under the assumption that our commercial use zoning permit that we had worked with Jim on was sufficient to get things going, knowing that we were gonna be continuing on with the Licking County part of it after the fact, so.
I don't have a copy. Can I see that? Is that
Yeah.
all right? Thank you.
All right, questions and comments from our zoning commission.
Well, I think you raised a good point from last time. We talked about when you said should we vote no on this and figure out if there should be an Airbnb there. So, what, is that even possible? Because doesn't the code say on the first floor?
We can only, unless council changes the rules, we can only give the conditional. on the
Right,
second
so
floor.
then we
Variance-
worked into
a
that.
variance wouldn't do that either.
You can't
for
get a variance
residential.
for a first floor.
There is no such thing as a use variance. You cannot grant, a variance is only intended to be applied to development standards, setbacks, number of parking spaces, things like that can be granted a variance, but the use of a property cannot be granted a variance.
Am I allowed to ask then what the when that code was set? I assume it was probably conversations about the commercial district in general and not having it first floor. Was there conversations about what happens when you add a residential into the mix? Because there are homes right within a very tight allotted space or zone where you can actually have even short-term transient rentals. Was there conversation? Because to me, it feels like it had to be a purposeful thing to stop it from happening.
Well,
by
we're
doing
sort
this.
of like at a disadvantage with that GCC one being in so broad an area, including a lot of residential homes, and you can't, it's really difficult to change the zoning, so we were trying to find a solution for this, and it's all of the zoning rules we make for GCC one that we want to protect the historic downtown, also apply to all those other houses, unless there's another mechanism that the council passes to allow us to protect the downtown separately, which there is an idea that's being floated out there for historical design overlay, which would allow us to provide different rules for the downtown while everything is still in the same zoning code, which I've been pushing really hard for, but this board can't pass zoning code, so we're limited to what council
Can make
gives
a
us to apply. Yeah.
Originally,
you can
the intent
recommend
of what
zoning
we
code.
did was to preserve our
Yeah, but we
housing
can't
stock,
get anything.
because
Yeah,
we have
I
so
know.
many investors moving into the city. Airbnbs are popular, especially with, the shortage of homes in the area. We wanted to preserve our housing stock. We didn't want to see things be taken over, just completely by Airbnbs, especially at a time, pricing is a little different now. It might be cost prohibitive, but for a while, our pricing was some of the lowest price points, in the region over here, especially when you look at Columbus. So it was very attractive to buy 5 or 6 houses and turn them into Airbnbs, and it wasn't unheard of. We were trying to preserve our housing stock. Now with GCC one, that becomes tough because you have a lot of commercial and you have a lot of housing stock.
Was there
And it is
discussion
hard to.
of capping that because of that? Like capping the amount?
It's hard to
so
say
that-
because it was a couple years ago. I'm not sure what all we discussed, but
I don't think so.
it's hard to delineate in that area everything that happens.
But my house could technically be converted into, again, a bank, a brothel. I mean.
Not a brothel.
It's in the commercial district, so really, there could be a lot of other things it could be turned into.
Could be a daycare.
Could be, yeah. I'm just,
I'll jump in.
Sean can clarify. in our-
Aside, like,
That's not right. Yeah,
That's
not-
putting aside like building code issues.
Right.
There are,
Totally.
there are a lot of building code and uses that are defined that would screen out a lot of uses on those properties. And I believe historically, the intent of GCC one in that area was because it was a restrictive use and only allowed certain things to happen, which is why that area has been preserved for 70-some years.
Well, and to go back to Thad's point, not everything or anything could be allowed in that either. Even if it was a permitted use, lot size takes a large component of what we're looking at here. So for a GCC one district, 35% of the area has to be impervious surface. So the parking requirements that would be associated with the business, they would have to have enough space in order to accommodate these things. So not all lots are created equal. You would almost have to buy 3 or 4 of them. Not saying that's outside the realm of possibilities, but to say that if you don't do this, you get something worse. I think your current code is set up and structured in a way that that has parameters that don't allow for the brothels or for the banks and for any other types of allowable uses in that area. There's a lot of other things that limit and can control those other uses. So
That's it. It feels to me that the purpose of having the GCC one within that space and the assumption up to, I don't know, maybe 5 years ago, was that you would see home-based businesses. You would see, I don't know, law office on the first floor and, offices on the second floor.
Yeah.
And you would maintain the structure as a historical, but you have the ability to put a monument sign out front because it's in a commercial district. And I think the assumption is that you would have a blend from the downtown into the SR1, UR1 seamlessly from an intensity standpoint. It wasn't until 4 or 5 years ago that we started thinking about the transient piece and the Airbnb piece and how that would apply in this situation. From my perspective, thinking back to the application, it was a lot of marrying the boxed buildings in the downtown space to this. And I think this is the first one that we've had like this, which we
Correct.
talked about, I
Yeah,
think at
no,
length, that
I understand.
appreciated your patience at that time because there was a lot of questions and back and forth around it. For me, I think the biggest piece that would help this, and we've said it, I think we need to action it, and I think we need to action it sooner rather than later, is a historical overlay district. Because I think at the end of the day, what everybody wants to have, what you want to have, you talk about it, is maintaining that house, maintaining the historical aspect of the house, which I deeply appreciate. Maintaining the use of the house at an intensity level that doesn't degrade the history of it,
100%.
but adds to the narrative of its use, of
Yep.
its location within the city.
Yep.
And then you can maintain that business, you can add to Johnstown, and I think you even mentioned later on future uses personally, if it comes to that.
Definitely.
For me, I think the historical overlay piece would help solve and bridge a lot of that, because it would preserve what we want to preserve visually, aesthetically, as well as from a intensity use, and bridge that gap between the commercial and the residential. That, I think, is where we can go with it. I think the difficult part right now is that the conditions are set as they are for what was there, and it's being used outside of that scope. So I think that's the next question, is how to approach the violation as it was given. I don't see in here where it mentions utilizing the first floor in a commercial.
The solution that I was given was, well, if you commercialize the space,
So
then
it's
when
in the
guests
minutes.
are renting the upstairs,
Find them in here.
they basically are also paying for your commercial use downstairs space, similar to like, that's how, I mean, Ghostwriter, it's not the same because they're truly separate spaces,
Right,
but I
right.
do believe their upstairs tenants have availability to the downstairs, or vice versa.
But they can be used independent of each other. Yeah,
Yes,
you're
so
right.
the proposed solution that I was given from council, I believe, was, hey, this might be one kind of, not a loophole, but a workaround. The problem is that for us to go through that
Mm-hmm.
process is now causing all these other things to happen.
And it would
Money,
detract.
structure, and that's not our intent, right? That's like the opposite of our intent, so it feels really, doesn't feel right. Nor can I afford to put another $25,000-$30,000. I won't emotionally let that happen to the house, but I also financially, it makes no sense
Right.
to do that just to work around something that, again, maybe made sense 5 years ago and now it, I don't know, it just doesn't anymore.
Yeah.
So,
Can I ask a question of the commission?
Please.
Upon reviewing the code, I don't see anything that specifically does not allow these types of uses to happen on the first floor. So seemingly, please correct me if I'm wrong, seemingly this is a condition that was applied through the public hearing process to this conditional use permit, is that correct?
This stems from
Well-
past precedent.
Well, I
because
think
we've
there's like one sentence in there, right?
115503B mentions second story,
Yes.
and multifamily, single-family dwelling units located in commercial structures.
Right, but this
I
is
think they'd be
related to-
interpreted.
This is related to D, not B, correct? This is related to a hotel and transient accommodation, not a commercial use in a residential.
I'll help you, Trevor. If you're online, that's not the latest version.
Okay.
The latest version,
To Ben's point in our earlier conversation, codification of these things
right,
takes some
this
time.
one was passed, January or February, or even maybe possibly December of last year.
Okay.
This provision of the code, and it states, and I'm gonna email this to you right now, hotels and transient accommodations located on the second level or higher of the structure.
That's what the new code reads?
I'm gonna email it to you right now.
Okay.
and there's no again, we bought previous to
No, of
this
course.
being known also. I don't
If
know
the-
if that
if the
carries.
use-
A purchase is not what establishes grandfathering, it's whether the use is already in effect.
Had you all already been doing this and the code was changed after you'd established that use, it would be a different conversation that we're having. Yeah. That's what I was trying to get to the bottom of that, just because I wasn't involved in that initial conversation.
I'm gonna email it to you and.
Okay.
I'll tell you, when we first read it too, we assumed it meant sleeping, to to be honest, sleeping accommodation on the second floor, which, again, I'm like, okay, it's a little funky because our downstairs bedroom, that's an ensuite meant for elderly people that can't go up our very narrow old stairs, you know, so it stinks. Like now I've had a family ask, can we stay there? And I'm like, no, there's nowhere
Right.
for your,
Understood.
like, grandma, right? So, but like, fine, we'll get rid of the downstairs, we convert it to another gathering space, sitting space, thinking that was okay before we came into that first, you know, meeting. So we even didn't fully.
The shopkeeper mentality is the piece that we just, from the downtown space to these other GCC areas is what lent into that logic and thought process.
The only piece I'll say, and I'm not advocating for or against, it's more of a procedural situation, and Trevor brought it up a little bit earlier during the design review process, and that is whatever standard you put in place for this, it will be emulated and reciprocated. So you may have a spectacular owner of a property that's doing all of the right things and screening the clients, which are all optional because they're not codified. And we appreciate the fact that she's doing that. But pick the chair, not the person. And it's been referenced, maybe that's a bad analogy, but what I'm getting at is, it's the policy.
Process, not people.
There you go.
We talked about setting precedents last time, and that, yeah.
So that, like I said, not advocating for or against, but whenever you do make a decision, it's impactful from the next applicant that would want to do the same thing in the GCC one.
So at the end of the
May not
day-
have her best interest and guiding principles at heart.
What's the action to be taken today by the board? What do we walk away doing? Either accepting the
You have the
violation
ability to
happened-
revoke it, you have, correct me if I'm going wrong here, Thad, maybe I should defer to you. From what I understand from the code, 113305, you have the ability to revoke a conditional use permit.
You have the ability to revoke, but I would believe you also have the ability to continue under current pretenses, or I would assume you could offer a cure period.
Right, yeah, you could revoke, you could allow it to continue. The question is, and I think the question this evening is whether the use that's being put to that first floor is consistent with the condition that was included in the initial conditional use approval. So it would sort of be either you revoke the conditional use altogether, or you allow it to continue, but with a finding that this particular use as described by the property owner is not compliant with the condition. And so then, then the property owner must stop that use on the first floor.
My argument on this previously was that unfortunately this property is in a state where it is very tough, if not impossible, to use as we have it written. And unfortunately, at the last meeting, we added conditions to it that are also going to make it cost prohibitive and harder to do. So
Is there any way to define a de facto historical district now with the intent to create one in the future with allowable use with this, because it would be within the de facto historical district, defined by the boundaries that are?
I don't think it's prudent to define an entire district tonight, and as much as I would like to.
You can clearly see the intent based on the map. What we're missing is the actual piece to overlay on top of it.
We have to use what we have now.
I understand.
Yeah, I feel.
But it comes down to
I feel-
definition. It comes down to how you define the condition, if you can redefine the condition. Because I understand the intent, and this isn't gonna be the first thing that we find. This isn't gonna be the first application like this that comes forward, but it does set the precedence. And I'm just trying to find
I appreciate it.
what that ground is, because I think that's what we have talked about doing before too.
So
But
Yeah,
I understand.
We had a lot of pain last time and trying to reconcile the desired use for the facility, but then also the other challenges with the first floor and what's allowed, or permitted, I'm sorry, permitted by ordinance. So, I mean, the sticking point is the item 3, the transit use is second floor only. So for
I think
transit
we
use-
exhausted all options last time to try to make this feasible, And in
I
the
don't-
process, I think we have found out that it's not practical.
Well, I was gonna recommend, Trevor's here. Is there, to answer her question, is there any options?
The way I'm reading the code now, I mean, honestly, from my standpoint, the way I've implemented and reviewed conditional use permits in the past, condition 3 wasn't even needed as a condition of approval because the code already explicitly requires that hotel and transient accommodations are located on the second level or higher of a structure. So from my standpoint, if I was from the planner's point of view, reading this code, if you want hotel or transient accommodation use not on the second floor, meaning on the first floor of any building, not just this one, you couldn't have it. You need to, basically the code needs to reflect the ability to use these on the first floor if you even want that as an option. Because right now, as the CUP is written, you don't need a condition stating you can't use the first floor. The code already prohibits that, the way it's written. So, in order, from my standpoint, in order to allow what the applicant is proposing, is the code needs to be modified if that's the desire of this commission and the city council, to allow for those sorts of uses to accommodate the first floor. Because from the way I read this, honestly, you couldn't even, if you built a hotel from the ground up, like let's say Holiday Inn wanted to come in, technically the way this code's written, A, it would require a conditional use permit, and B, they could not have any uses on the first floor except for entry and exit, and that's it. No rooms on the first floor, like no accessory uses. That's how I read the code. That may be too stringent, and that can correct me, but
Yeah, they would have to their first floor space would have to be some other commercial space that's
Right.
not integral to the hotel itself.
so from my standpoint, this doesn't really work for the applicant standing in front of you, and it also doesn't really work for anyone that potentially would come in to build a hotel from the ground up.
You could have a hotel, but you'd have to put a restaurant on the bottom.
The entirety of the bottom. And that does, I mean, in the real world of hotels and things like that, you
Restaurant,
build,
gift
that's
shop.
just not how things work
And then-
that I've seen.
And then do you want to, I'm just going back to the GCC1 districts because we're talking about hotels. Is it the desire to have hotels in the GCC1 district or the GCC2 district or the light manufacturing? So then you have to specify where you want hotels to be located at.
Right, and then now
I think
we're back into changing code, so
I think that's
we
the
need to stick with
historical
where we
overlay
are.
district would preserve
Don't make code here,
what's there and better define what.
unfortunately.
Well, I think you're going to
Unfortunately,
have.
that's not gonna be a fast process.
No, it's not going to be a fact, and I think you're going to have differing opinions on.
Yeah.
If you did do a historic overlay district, my general perception is going to be that historic district where they want to allow transient business, because this is what I've heard from the board, is specifically in the downtown two-story structure areas, not in residential. Now, if that's inconsistent with what the council has provided me, then hey, whatever you all want is
You're right.
is all good. But what I've heard Jesse say previously is that overlay district, he wants it in that specific area, not in the residential area. Am I inaccurate in that?
So maybe precluded to.
Well, what I would tell you is the alternative is we could see on a smaller scale what's happening outside of our borders and multiple parcels being purchased. And then you're talking about building something that's wholly within the GCC1 scope in the middle of a residential district.
Right, but then we're talking about changing code at this point. I mean, as much as I want to, I mean, we can't. So, I mean, we have to rule on this tonight, and then come back in 2 weeks and write a recommendation for changing code.
Now you see where I'm stuck. I am just trying to implement what is in the code, and if I look away from this, then I'm not doing my job, and then I can get obviously chastised.
And again, this is just more background knowledge to help me try to understand the situation. I assume the way this is written, that it was geared towards existing structures that would basically be in the downtown? Because I mean, most of the rest of your GCC1 district is all single-story.
Yeah.
Trying to keep, it
oriented
was trying to
stuff.
keep the transient houses out of the neighborhoods, basically.
From my understanding, they wanted it in the second story of the historic shops area.
Okay.
I think the other point we're missing is and this kind of happened almost like what Ben's proposing. We had one of these uses show up as a non-conforming use, and we tried to make code on the fly, and here we are.
Yeah.
So that's what I'm saying. This is how we ended up here.
Yeah, fair point, and thank you for that, yeah.
We wanted to keep it out of residential areas, which is also true. But we also needed to, we didn't need to define a use. We could have had it as a non-conforming use and shut down that building, but zoning and council at the time decided not to.
Fair enough.
So we've ended up here now.
So, and this is just me thinking out loud, so please feel free to shut me down or anything like that, but, I mean, seemingly, the intent was to keep these sorts of uses out of residential neighborhoods. However, this property is along Main Street, is that correct?
Yep.
A possibility could be that as long as your frontage and your access is from 37 or 62, that could give some flexibility. That doesn't stick it just to the downtown area, where I feel like this probably is more applicable just based on the existing built infrastructure and the desires of the city. But short of going in and creating a historic or some sort of overlay district, but that's going to include multiple different facets that we have: uses, signage, access, parking, development standards. It's literally writing an entirely new zoning district, and I don't want to rush that because you'll end up right back in the situation to Ryan's point.
I think that needs to be started yesterday, though, in my
I
opinion.
agree. We asked for it.
But I know
2 weeks ago.
everything's a priority, nothing's a priority, so.
You want me to,
Saying.
I gotta put the big rocks in first.
Absolutely. I don't think this is gonna be the last application we have of this type, but,
I'll bring it next week, I guess.
Does a bed and breakfast change things if there's someone living in the space? I mean, I have a house manager here that's,
bed and
know.
breakfast,
I mean, what?
there was a bed and breakfast within that GCC
I don't
one
think it's
district.
currently, I'd have to look, but I don't think we currently allow it though.
So that would be
Yeah, it was-
something,
it was
that would be a
Steve's house.
decision council would make. In my mind, it probably could, it may change things, but again, that would be up to council to make that decision.
It needs to be a district because otherwise we're getting into spot zoning, and I hate that we're here now, but.
The historical aspect of that area is gonna be lost if we don't have something to preserve it. But the bed and breakfast, did bed and breakfast really get pulled out of there? I feel like it
I
was
don't
there
see it.
before.
So it seems that we are talking more about like code
Right.
revisions versus
Make a motion.
question that's right in front of the commission at the moment, which is whether to, continue this conditional use permit or revoke it.
Walter, give us a motion.
So I think I would encourage the commission to circle back to this particular property and then, at another time, move forward with code revision recommendations if that's your will.
I don't know, I'm assuming, we have people here to speak on our behalf, but I don't know if we're at, I don't think. You guys.
I always
You
let
already
them,
know.
I'll always let people speak. I don't want to stifle
No.
public comment.
If you have any.
We love it.
Mike Bailey, I own the house right next door to this place.
Could you come up to the
Could you-
mic
yeah,
so
could
that
you
you
come
can
up
get
front?
on the
We
recording?
want to make sure that we can hear it. I'm sorry.
I'm sure you can hear me, I'm very loud. I'm Mike Bailey, and I own the house right next door at 118. I come for you again to recommend that you let her have her conditional use for right now. Figure out a way to make it work at the bottom. Since she's had that there, there's been very little traffic. It's very quiet. They're good neighbors. And contrary to what Sean thinks, there is several businesses I can think of that can go in there that don't need parking, that would be a real eyesore and probably do damage to the house. That's a house that's been there all my life. I'm 71 years old and I've lived in that house for 66 years. And I love that little section of residential property that's zoned commercial now. I think I told you last time, my dad was mayor of this village when they zoned that commercial. Ryan and Jackie are good neighbors. They've had nothing but the best people there so far. They haven't caused any problems. I know by the code that, you're saying they can't have anybody at the bottom, but I think you ought to continue it and try to work it out. Because, like Ryan has said, it's going to continue. People are going to come over and over again to try to do these things, and you need to have a plan, and right now, the plan seems sort of muddled. You can let them on the second floor, you can't let them on the first floor. How are they going to get it? If you don't let them come through the first floor, and we had to make that exception, how are they going to get to the second floor? I like Ben's idea. Try to figure out how to make it work. I think they're good for the community, and I think we'd be sad to see them leave. So that's my comments.
Thank you.
Could I do a quick clarification, since something that I referenced got called out, and I'll defer
Sure.
to Thad or Trevor to backfill. All businesses require parking at this point. Maybe what was allowed before didn't require parking, but from the code that I'm referencing, I don't know any business that doesn't have some minimum parking requirement. So I just want to clarify that, and am I wrong on that, or?
No, any newly established business would have to meet the requirements
Right.
of the code.
Parking, drainage, lighting,
They would have to.
all
put
the
in-
above.
Yep, parking, drainage, landscaping. Sometimes if they're adding parking, they're gonna have to put in a water
Right.
retention program, which would be a retention pond or underground structures, so.
Which turns this into a project that you never originally intended to do, which I felt was unfair.
I'm not
in
trying
the
to,
beginning.
I just wanna make sure that I'm not misstating and
I mean, we bought the house before this was, this, yeah, so we're trying to work.
I'm not sure of the timeline, but I think we had this in effect before you purchased the house. I'm pretty sure we did. Yeah, or it just wasn't disclosed to you properly by the seller. But that's,
And the thing is that the
Right.
time of purchase is not
right,
germane, it's the time of establishment of a use.
right.
So if the commercial use was established, that's what matters.
Right. Right. If we outlawed title offices and Jesse wanted to make his tomorrow, he couldn't, even though he's owned the house for a couple of years. All right.
So, I mean, we've looked at some different things as far as the use, or how to use it with the current stipulations, the current code. That's what Thad has pointed out to us. So we've got limitations on there. So I only see two options. Either you don't use the first floor other than the egress that's been called out in the conditions, or it's in violation, we have to revoke it. I mean, that's the only two options I see here right now. If somebody else sees something else, let me know. With current code.
Is there a timeline for revocation, for acting on a violation?
There's not one in the code. So what, I'm thinking out loud here, what the commission could do is say that the conditional use is revoked effective in X number of days, let's say 30 days, if the condition of original approval is not restored.
Are you allowed a moratorium of use or not?
Well, it wouldn't be a moratorium.
No, I'm talking separate but related. Is that something you can do?
You can choose not to approve, are you talking about in the code?
So just in my head, if it were a situation where the understanding was what the intent wanted to do, and we wanted to get there to affect other potential applications of a similar nature, and you delay assessing the violation with a moratorium on accepting future use and a cooling period to address the obvious lack of code that would have prohibited this issue to begin with.
I don't think this is an
Council
issue
could
of
do
lack of
that
code.
for a defined period of time.
That's what I figured. All right.
Can you also define for me the term use? Like how, is there, like how is it established? The term of use, like what denotes use, sleeping versus, you know, like,
Well, the use would be 15503D, hotel and transient accommodation.
I guess accommodation. You can speak, yeah. Is that okay?
Yeah.
James Connor Chinsky. I just had a quick question. So you mentioned earlier that the code was already determined of what would prohibit use of the first floor before they even, or that was already established once they decided that they wanted to use the property for the use that it's intended for.
Right.
Council mentioned that the use was determined after the fact, but if they purchased the house prior to the revision of that code, how can that be determined? Like, is it a written form that's used to determine the use of the property, or is it something verbal or ideological that is established before the revision of the code that would make it almost nearly impossible to penalize them for that? Do you understand what I'm saying?
You're asking if they're grandfathered in?
Yeah, basically.
Well, I understand that purchase of the property isn't, but you mentioned that use of the property as hotel or whatever you define as use of a transient space or transient person to use of the space. So I need clarification on where, like you mentioned earlier.
Was it being rented out to third parties for stays of 30 days or fewer? That would be the establishment of the use. In this case, transient accommodation. And the way that would be established would either be by evidence put forward by testimony or by providing a certificate of zoning compliance that had previously been issued.
And that permit was granted, when was that? Does it really know? 'Cause
Well,
that-
in this case, the conditional use was not granted until after they had purchased it because they were the applicants.
Right, and would that be prior to the revision of the code? Is my
No.
question.
No.
Okay.
It was April this year that the permit, they came before and got the permit, conditional permit.
Thank you.
All right. Any further comment?
Just a question. There are other folks in town that rent their houses out, right?
There are
I
other,
know
there are
our
other
neighbors
ones
do.
in the
My
GCC
neighbors
one
do.
district.
Our neighbors
So if
do.
there are any others that aren't
They're
approved,
not short term.
Now, how do they rent their house out?
so long-term rentals allowed,
What's the difference between what we're doing and long-term?
the use. I mean, it all comes down to the use of zoning definition.
Yeah, yeah, transient accommodations are generally defined as 30 days or fewer.
Yeah.
Whereas if it's not 30 days or fewer, it is not transient, it is like a residential rental.
Right.
And no permit is needed, nothing's needed.
For a long-term, for a rental of a term of 30 days or more, no municipal permit is needed.
Does the city verify contracts with each property on length of stay? So, and does the city police that or monitor that or enforce that? Long-term contracts.
We have rental registration legislation that we passed before that's not able to be enforced.
I hadn't heard that it's not able to be enforced. We passed that. Did we have any trouble enforcing that? No, it can be enforced.
The contracts are provided by the owners to the city.
I didn't think that the city was tracking rental.
We are straying from the question that is in front of the commission tonight, which is whether this conditional use is in violation of the conditions on which it was granted.
So is there a motion to move forward on this in any way?
I could make a suggestion based upon what seems to be the tenor of the commission this evening, which I interpret to be to give some accommodation to the property owner. And so my suggestion would be, if the commission, based upon what has been presented this evening, is inclined to revoke the conditional use, the commission could move to revoke, but make that revocation effective only if the first floor transient use has not been discontinued within 30 days. Otherwise, the conditional, so.
So we're providing a cure period.
Providing a cure period, yeah. And if it is still being used on the first floor for a transient accommodation use, then then that revocation would take effect.
I don't like that motion. That's kicking the can.
So I'll make that motion.
Make that motion.
I will.
Is there a second?
I'll make a
And
motion.
to be clear, so that motion is to revoke the conditional use effective 30 days from now, unless the first floor transient accommodation use has ceased. Okay, just to be clear to
So does it
the
automatically-
property owner and everybody.
Does it automatically revoke itself, or do they have to come back to get it revoked again?
It would automatically be revoked if on September 22nd, there is still a first floor transient accommodation use as found by the zoning inspector,
Or if it's marketed that way.
or if it's marketed that way.
So if it's not
What's
being
the
used,
thoughts
it's
on the
not
enforceability
marketed,
of that?
Then it's good.
then it's good.
For the second floor.
Saying if we want to have our business, then you're gonna take it away.
Wait, well, not.
Well, you're just gonna give us
we-
30 more days.
Yeah,
That's
we
all,
can't.
that's all you're doing.
The issue
Yeah,
is
let's just
about the
kick it in.
first
That's all
floor
you're-
and whether it is used for transient accommodation. That's the question in front of the commission. So
Correct.
that's the motion on the floor.
Will there still be opportunity to change the code?
That's the solution that I see, is that.
Since we have a motion on the floor, can we take a
There's
vote on
not-
the motion on the
there's not
floor
comment.
and then have any comment after the vote?
I'll
Well, it hasn't
second,
been-
I'll second it.
For
Bentley?
No.
Steve Dyer?
I made the motion. Yes.
Jesse Coppell?
Yes.
Chairman Green?
No.
Walter Rob?
Yes.
Motion passes 3-2.
All right. So with that, we will give you the option of a cure period of 30 days. And at that point, if the first floor use is still in effect, the use will be revoked.
And if the benefit, what I see is the benefit, the only resolution is we come up with a design review district, long-term, so at least you got 30 days. I don't know, that's there is long-term hope if we get some code changes, so.
Would this be something you discuss at the next council meeting?
It could be if it makes it on the agenda, but as far as the zoning meeting, it won't be on the docket at the next zoning meeting.
So,
How does it get on the council agenda?
The council would have to place it on there.
you want to speak to that, Thad, or I can't? And I'm just going to speak procedurally.
The question is about whether there's a change to the code to accommodate what's going on.
Right, so council can initiate any code changes that they want. It has to go through the proper process. There's an introduction, and then there's a second hearing with public comment, and then a vote. And then if it were to be voted yes or no, if it's voted yes, then it would go into effect 30 days later, provided there's no referendum, all that good jazzy stuff. So that's one option. I believe an applicant or a property owner, this board can initiate a recommendation to the council if they would like to see an ordinance changed, and then this board could vote yea, nay, and then that then would go to council, and then council could then act upon it in the same fashion that they did with the other piece of it, if they were to initiate it. So really, there's only two options. You can make a recommendation, or B, council can initiate the process on their own. Am I covering it?
For a text amendment, yes.
Okay. Not for a zoning map amendment.
Not for a property owner could make a zoning map amendment application, but for a text amendment, it's either council initiated or Planning and Zoning Commission initiated with a recommendation.
And I would appreciate some clarification so that this guy right here and all of us are not sitting in this situation, because we are in a very precarious spot when we're asked to enforce a code that is written and it maybe doesn't jive. So then we get looked at as the bad guys, and really, I'm just trying, and Thad's trying to, and Trevor's trying to enforce what council has given us to enforce. So I would appreciate some crystal clear clarity as to where the heck they want to go on this, and then move one direction or the other instead of trying to land somewhere in the middle.
Right.
Personally, I think we've seen before, we've had definitions of particular code that's defined by street parameters. I think the overlay district is a long term. I think it's going to take some time, it's going to take some deliberation. I think with respect to this, we have the ability to define what we want within the GCC boundary, bounded by street names at the very least, which I think we've done that before. If we don't say street names, we can say GCC 1 in general and define current use, residential, or something like that. But I think what we need to do in 2 weeks from now is come back with some kind of idea of how to approach this within the GCC 1 district, while working toward a greater historical overlay district that approaches this type of scenario.
So if their upstairs tenants come down, they get a letter in the mails that the process we just voted on?
No.
What's gonna happen? How does this get, what does this mean?
So they
This
get
means they have-
entrance and exit, but in terms of use of the first floor for accommodation of transient guests, that is not what is permitted by what conditional use was previously allowed. So if it's one thing for them to be coming and going, just looking at what was passed, guest entrance and exit. But if they are being, if they are,
If someone's watching TV downstairs, would that count?
yes.
Okay. So no one's gonna be seen in the window. That's, all right.
That's,
We're at the point of splitting hairs.
that's
guys.
what
This is
was,
that's
that's
crazy.
what was approved.
All right, well, we will try to reconvene with some better options here in 2 weeks. If anybody wants to make a recommendation to council that we direct staff or MKSK to come up with something, we could do that, or we come up with it ourselves within 2 weeks. That's our options.
What's the feasibility of having something in 2 weeks to look at and see?
I mean, a historical overlay, 0%.
Not a historical.
Just for,
Some surgical changes to just
Yes,
that one specific.
text changes specifically.
I can get something out for the board to review probably by the end of the week. I mean, it will literally just be though, changing that one line of code.
Yep.
That was just changed earlier this year.
Yeah, we don't wanna change one code, we wanna have the overlay district.
I can give you the real short version.
That's gonna
of what
take a month.
Trevor's gonna do, and that is
least.
remove the second story. It's gonna be allowable.
Yeah.
If that's what you want, great. If it's not what you want, let us know.
Yeah.
But by God, let us know.
And the reason I think it can be that straightforward of a change is because this is already going through a conditional use permit. So because there are pretty substantial review criteria established in the code in 1131.03, you already have this use going through an elevated level of review by going to the Planning and Zoning Commission versus just a staff level review. So I think that a small technical change like that could, in the interim, get you all a solution that works. It may not be exactly what you want, but it works. It solves this issue, not tonight, unfortunately, but it will solve that issue. And then we can use those discussions to help formulate a bigger overall historic overlay district. But that is, I cannot stress this enough, creating one of those districts is like creating a whole new zoning code for a part of your town, your city. And that does not need to be rushed, and you want to do it right the first time. Because if not, we will be in the situation many more times.
If we make that simple change, though, the concern is that it's out there, it's open,
It is, sure.
and it can be.
Still has to go through a conditional use.
Correct. It's not just, you don't just come in, apply for a business permit, and you're off to the races.
So how would that affect previously granted conditional use permits for these in the GCC1 district?
So long as they meet any requirements based on this changed code.
Would they then be allowed to use the first floor?
Yeah.
So
I'll send you over something by Friday. You tell me what you think.
creating an entire code like that in an overlay district is gonna take some time. As any of these do. We're not a 30-day solution on that. I wanna be clear.
Well, two other questions real quick though, to that, with text changing. Is there an opportunity for commercial versus residential? Or you're not changing the first floor accommodations for commercial buildings, you're talking about residential?
Well, the problem is they're all zoned commercial buildings,
Right.
regardless of what their use is now. It was all changed. It's a house, yes, but it's a commercial house for any,
But I don't have I'm not commercially approved though,
right?
So
That's not a zoning issue though.
Right.
Yeah, that's not probably moving the ball in the direction you want.
Yeah, that's.
Sean, do you have anything for other business?
I wouldn't pull it that.
All right,
something out.
let's think about this in our break. We're not gonna fix this by the next zoning meeting, unfortunately. But we will try to take a look at things and have better answers when we reconvene. I don't believe there's any other business. Anything by our staff? Teresa, any other business? Council, or sorry, not council, zoning commission, any other business? Hearing
I dare not.
Hearing none, I will make a motion to adjourn.
I didn't think you were either. I just didn't want to be taken to the cleaners.
All in favor? Aye.